Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had a Hidden Max Stats Gamer Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku yawned, waking up from his sleep with the sun. He sat up and threw his sheets aside, rubbing his bleary eyes. But once he opened those eyes, he saw something odd. It was just strange white text floating in the air. Hello, Midoriya Izuku. Welcome to your quirk, the gamer. Apologies for manifesting so late. Was this some kind of joke? It was probably an illusion quirk or something. Most likely just one of the other kids at school messing with him, using their quirk to make him look the fool. Izuku sighed and curled up in bed. It was a cruel prank to play on a quirkless kid, trying to make him think he had a quirk. Well, he wasn't going to let anyone make fun of him. He would ignore the stupid message as long as it took. Izuku waited, but the words in the air didn't go away. He huffed and poked the words impatiently. They rippled under his touch. Izuku blinked as the words in the air changed. To begin, please say, profile aloud. This will bring you to a list of your abilities. If you wish to see any categories within the profile window, state them aloud while in the profile. State close when you wish to close the window. Say to confirm. Izuku stared at the message for a long time. Eventually, he cautiously said, okay. The text vanished as if it were never there. Then Izuku, feeling cautious, feeling as though his classmates were about to jump out any minute and make fun of him, whispered, profile, quiet enough that none would hear it. A giant box appeared across his vision, filled with white-colored text and numbers. Midoriya Izuku LVL, 12 age, 14. HP, 120-120. Exhaustion, 0-600. Title, Fun. Quirk, the gamer. Stats, skills, inventory, relationships, quest log. Izuku still felt stupid for experimenting with it, but he glanced around. No one was around but him. If this was an illusion quirk, then how was that person changing the illusion to follow whatever he said? Stats, Izuku said, testing the waters. The white text flashed to a different screen. Vit, 12, Esta, 6, Dex, 7, Int, 15, Wis, 13, Cha, 11. Unallotted stat points, 0. Were those stats meant to be for him? He supposed it made sense. His strength was the lowest, and he wasn't very strong. If someone was making stats for him, that's what they'd probably pick, after all. And the interface had reacted to his words again, which meant the first time hadn't been a fluke. Skills. Izuku said. Skill list. Japanese LVL, 81, speaking the Japanese language. Literacy LVL, 45, reading and writing language, Japanese. Mathematics LVL, 45. Ability to use mathematical equations to solve problems. Quirk analysis LVL. 30. Make deductions about what a person can do with their powers and what their weaknesses might be. Observe LVL. 1. Gathers information about something when the player states, observe, while looking at that thing. If this was a quirk, it was the weirdest one Izuku had ever seen. Izuku was staring down at his spare notebook, pen in hand. He didn't want to put information about this in hero analysis for the future hashtag that seemed far too hopeful, like he was assuming all this was real. It probably wasn't. Really. It probably wasn't. Besides, even if this was a quirk, he didn't want anyone reading his usual notebook and finding out about it. Especially his mom, he didn't want to get her hopes up and then proceed to crush them. Better to put it in a top-secret notebook. He titled it, History Notes. Anticlimactic, but it was supposed to be a secret. He wrote about the strange, untouchable words that floated in the air. He wrote down everything written in the stats and skills pages as well. Once he was done writing those things, he still had more to check. Profile, Izuku said. Midoriya Izuku LVL, 12 age, 14. HP, 120-120. Exhaustion, 0-600. Title, Fun. Quirk, the gamer. Stats, skills, inventory, relationships, quest log. It says my quirk is the gamer, Izuku muttered, writing it down. It said it was the gamer earlier, didn't it? So it's definitely claiming to be my quirk. Weird. The gamer was a strange choice of name. But Izuku could understand how his quirk was supposed to be similar to a game, considering the leveling system and the stat points. Inventory, Izuku said. It popped up, but unfortunately, inventory, locked required level, LVL. 20. Required level? Izuku muttered, then glanced at his profile. Since I'm only level 12, I need 8 more levels to access the inventory, but how do I level up? And what was inventory even useful for, if he did suddenly manage to reach level 20? There was no one to answer him. With the inventory unavailable for now, Izuku decided to try the next tab. Relationships. Midoriya Inko, Rep plus Unconditional Love. Bakogu Katsuki, Rep, Enemy. Taipei. Bakogu Mitsuki, Rep plus Friendly Acquaintance. Bakogu Masaru, Rep plus Friendly Acquaintance. Classmates Homeroom, Rep, Moderate Hostility. Was this true? As happy as he was to see his mother listed as Unconditional Love, seeing such low rep with Kaken made him wince. But, well, it was true that Kaken wasn't that fond of him, so it wasn't like it was wrong or anything. He didn't agree with the enemy classification, but if the type was listed as petty, maybe he could consider Kaken a petty enemy. That was kind of like frenemies, right? But this whole weirdness was making less and less sense as the result of someone's quirk or an elaborate prank. How would someone else's quirk know Midoriya's relationship with Bakuga's parents? Izuku, come down for breakfast, he heard his mom yell. Izuku sighed. He hadn't had time to look at the last tab quest log. But whatever. This would help him check something else as well. Izuku could see white text in front of him, moving with him as he walked, because he'd never said, close. Now was the chance to see if his mother could see it. Izuku cautiously sat down at the breakfast table. His mother greeted him cheerfully, "Good morning, Izuku," and gave him a bowl of miso soup. He started eating his food absent-mindedly, glancing up for her reaction to the white screen in front of him. There was no reaction. In fact, at one point she reached through the text to put down some tea and natto, all without even blinking. His mom definitely couldn't see it. So, was it some kind of illusion? Some kind of false computer interface? Close, he muttered to himself, and the profile vanished. All that was left in front of him was his soup. Izuku tried to make conversation with his mother, but it was difficult when his mind was still whirling with what he'd just discovered. "Sorry for being distracted," he said. "I just saw this really cool villain fight online and I can't wait to take notes on it." His mom smiled sadly and shook her head. "You can take notes on it after we eat. It's Sunday after all." Sunday, that was perfect. He could spend all day playing with whatever it was. He wanted it to be a quirk. Really badly. Even though it probably wasn't. But whatever it was, maybe it could be useful. If it was real, being able to tell what other people thought of you, that was almost like an entire quirk on its own, wasn't it? So even if the rest of it was worthless, by the time breakfast had finished, Izuku had made his decision. If this was even remotely real, he was going to use it to be a hero. Whatever advantages this quirk could offer, he was going to make the most of them. Izuku figured he wouldn't get anywhere with the gamer unless he explored it a little. He put his disbelief aside and tried to get into business mode. "Quest log," Izuku said, in the privacy of his room. He'd been curious about this one. He wasn't entirely sure what it would end up being. Outstanding quests. Tutorial quest part 1. He had a tutorial quest? How was he supposed to activate it? He could probably try just saying the quest, right? Tutorial quest part 1, Izuku said. Tutorial quest point 1. Explore each page of profile heavy checkmark. Ask for explanation, stats. Ask for explanation, relationships. Rewards? The worked. And the check mark must mean he completed that part of the quest. He had checked every page of the profile. Now all he had to do was finish the other 2 parts. Izuku felt a little stupid asking a quirk this. "Can I have an explanation of stats?" When the wall of text changed, Izuku was relieved that it worked. Base stats. Vitality, Physical state in regards to health and constitution affects HP, exhaustion threshold. Strength. The quality of being physically strong affects attack power. Dexterity. Ability to move quickly and easily affects dodging, base speed. Intelligence. The ability to learn new things quickly affects time spent learning skills. Wisdom. The ability to properly apply knowledge to situations affects problem solving. Charisma. Charm that inspires others to like you and take up your cause affects conversation, relationship statuses. Izuku scribbled down every word in his notebook, in case they'd be important later. In particular, he made careful note of the gamer's distinction between wisdom and intelligence, might come in handy later. Once he'd written everything down, Izuku said, Tutorial Quest Part 1. The tutorial quest popped right back up, even though he hadn't gone through the quest log first. Convenient. Tutorial Quest Point 1. Explore each page of profile heavy checkmark. Ask for explanation, stats heavy checkmark. Ask for explanation, relationships. Rewards? Explanation, relationships? Izuku asked. The relationship screen shows you what other people, or groups of people, think of you. People you interact with often or who have strong feelings about you are more likely to appear in the Relationships tab. If you want someone in particular to be added or removed from the list, say, Add name to relationships, or Remove name from relationships. Alert. Quest. Tutorial Quest Part 1 has been completed. Collect rewards? Izuku wrote down the message about relationships, but he was mostly focused on the alert. He felt a knot of anxiety and excitement as he looked at it. He took a deep breath and said, Collect rewards. Tutorial Quest Part 1 complete. Rewards hidden. Plus 500 XP, plus 5 stat points. Alert. Level up. You are now LVL 13. The quest gave him XP? Congratulations on finishing the tutorial quest. You're on your own now. What? But that was just the first part of the tutorial quest. What about the rest of it? Izuku shouted. When there was no answer, Izuku yelled out to no one, What even are you? What do you want with me? Izuku felt anger bubble up within him when the only response was quiet. Just abandon me, why don't you? Izuku muttered. He sighed. Profile. Midoriya Izuku LVL, 13 age, 14. HP, 120-120. Exhaustion, 0-600. Title, Thun. Quirk, the gamer. Stats, skills, inventory, relationships, quest log. Nothing changed when I leveled up, not even HP, Izuku muttered. Stats. Vit, 12, Esta, 6, Dex, 7, Int, 15, Wis, 13, Cha, 11. Unallotted stat points, 10. So that's what changed. He got 10 unallotted stat points. Unallotted stat points meant he could put them wherever he wanted, right? He glanced up at the rewards, which only promised 5 extra stat points. Now he had 10, even though he had none before. The only other thing had been leveling up. Had he received 5 unallotted stat points by level up? Izuku was tempted to immediately put them towards vitality. Since it had said that vitality affects HP, Izuku had the opportunity to give his HP a massive boost. And he was a bit tempted to do so. He wasn't sure, though, and he wanted to be thorough. He didn't want to blow his stat points off on something that wouldn't benefit him much in the future. Izuku wanted to maximize the benefit of whatever this was, but that was hard when he knew so little. Yet, the best way to prove that the gamer was real would be to boost his stat points and see if anything changed. He needed to know if this was real. But if he was going to do that, he wanted to choose something that would help him now. If he chose something that was immediately useful, it would justify him spending his stat points right away. And the best stat for that was intelligence. The description had said that he could use intelligence to learn skills faster. If he could learn skills faster now, he might get better at his skills fast enough that it would make spending his stat points now rather than later worth it. 10 stat points to intelligence, Izuku said, and the text changed in response. Vit, 12, Str, 6, Dex, 7, Int, 25, Wis, 13, Cha, 11. Unallotted stat points, 0. Okay, Izuku breathed. How do I test if I'm smarter? Izuku pulled out one of his analysis notebooks and set up a video of a hero fight on his computer. He started working on it, analyzing a fight between Present Mike and the villain Toxic Chainsaw. He decided to focus mainly on mix skills, since he already knew some of what Toxic Chainsaw could do from his other fights. 360-degree sound waves, weaponization of. As Izuku muttered and scribbled out his answers, he tried to think if this felt any easier or harder than usual. But to be honest, it didn't. It felt basically the same. He kept going anyway, deciding that he would evaluate afterwards if it were any more skilled than usual. Your problem-solving activity increased your wisdom. +1 WIS. Quirk analysis skill leveled up to level 31. Izuku paused to glance at the alerts. Stats. Vit, 12, STR, 6, Dex, 7, Int, 25, WIS, 14, Cha, 11. Unallotted stat points, 0. My wisdom got higher when I was doing problem-solving. Izuku glanced down at his quirk analysis. So quirk analysis isn't an intelligence-based ability, it's a wisdom-based one. Probably because quirk analysis dealt with the application of knowledge, not the learning of knowledge. Izuku sighed. So his new intelligence wasn't going to help him with quirk analysis directly. Izuku glanced at the quirk analysis skill level up. My new intelligence boost probably helped me level it up faster. So it helps me get better at quirk analysis faster, but it doesn't help me actually do the quirk analysis? Izuku shrugged to himself. If he focused on improving skills, then the intelligence boost might still be worth it, even though quirk analysis was a wisdom skill. Speaking of, there was another skill that he wanted to work on. He poked his head in the hallway, glancing out at his mom. Observe, Izuku whispered. Midoriya Inko LVL. 29 The Persevering. Quirk, attraction of small objects. See stats and skills. He could see her name, her quirk, her level, but what did the persevering mean? Was it a title, like he'd seen on his profile? See stats and skills, Izuku muttered. Observe failed. The target's level is too high. So he couldn't see her stats. Mom, Izuku said. I'm going to go to the park quick. Inko blinked in surprise. Oh, alright. Make sure to be back for dinner. I will, Izuku promised. She was probably surprised because he rarely left the house on the weekends. He didn't have any friends to meet anyway, but he had some experiments to run. He wanted to see if he could raise his other stat points by doing things they were related to. With dexterity, that would be running. And in the meantime, he could practice his observe and see if it actually worked on other people. Observe might be a good way to confirm that this is real, noted Izuku. If he could see things that it would be impossible for him to know, it was proof that something was at play. He started jogging on the sidewalk, and each time he saw someone, he would whisper observe under his breath. Their name, level, and what he was guessing was title popped up, along with an option to look at their stats and skills. He tried to look at stats as well, but he kept getting the message that the target's level was too high. He'd even tried looking at the stats of a level 6 kindergartner, but apparently even they were too high a level for Izuku's observe. Was it because observe was still a LVL 1 skill? After he'd run for 10 minutes, and was starting to get really tired, he got what he'd been looking for. Practicing has made you faster. +1 Dex. Yes. Izuku cheered to himself, ignoring the other people on the sidewalk. Newly motivated, he kept running and practicing his observability, hoping for them to improve. When he got home a few hours later, Izuku's legs felt like jelly and he was drenched in sweat. He'd spent time running around the park and given himself plenty of breaks, but he still was horribly tired. Am I really this out of shape? I had to keep stopping, since I didn't have enough endurance to run the whole time. Geez. I ought to run more often. On the bright side, observe skill leveled up to level 2. Practicing has made you faster. +1 Dex. Practicing has made you faster. +1 Dex. Observe skill leveled up to level 3. Observe skill leveled up to level 4. He'd gotten better. If he could keep improving his dexterity like this, he'd be fast in no time. He decided to stop after his exhaustion level reached. It seemed to increase the more he worked out, and if this is what 200 felt like, Izuku was frankly a little worried what would happen if he got all the way to 600 exhaustion. Death, he suspected. I'm going to take a shower. Izuku called from the door. He took off his shoes and went straight to the shower. He'd have to convince his mom to let him work out, though, or at least just go on runs to increase his dexterity. Izuku knew that he hadn't technically definitively proven that this was, well, real yet. But it hadn't gone away yet, and no one had jumped out to claim the prank. Though he didn't want to get his hopes up, with every passing second he felt a little bit more secure in his new, yet odd quirk. When Izuku woke up the next morning, he was briefly convinced that none of the previous day had happened, and it had all been some sort of weird fever dream. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, groaning. Monday. Profile: Midoriya Izuku LVL, 13 age, 14. HP, 120. Exhaustion, 68 600. Title: Thun. Quirk: The Gamer. Stats, Skills, Inventory, Relationships, Quest Log. Izuku blinked and stared at the text. So it hadn't been a fever dream. Izuku squinted at his exhaustion score. It was still at 68? But he'd just slept. When Izuku stood up, he could figure out why. His legs were super sore, not to mention the fact that he felt groggy overall. Izuku sighed. Great. Close, he said. His mom had left for work early, leaving him breakfast behind. Izuku quickly ate his food and sipped at his green tea, feeling himself get a little bit peppier. Which gave him an idea. Exhaustion, Izuku said, and to his pleasant surprise, only the exhaustion score popped up in front of him. Exhaustion, 48 600. It decreased, Izuku muttered to himself. He glanced down at the green tea. Observe. Green tea. Minus 20x, plus 6 HP. Good for you. A special item? His exhaustion had decreased by 20, so obviously the green tea must have done its work. Izuku grabbed some coffee from the coffee maker that his mother used, pouring a little bit into a cup. Observe, he said, once he was staring at the coffee. Black coffee. Minus 40x. A bitter taste. Decreases exhaustion a lot, but no health benefits, Izuku muttered. It's another item. He tried a few other things, but the table and pencil and silverware didn't seem to trigger Observe's effects like the coffee and green tea had. Izuku wished he was able to spend more time experimenting, but he had to get to school. His teachers wouldn't abide by him being late. He rushed to school and barely made it in time, sliding into his seat at the last moment. His teacher gave him a dirty look, but didn't say anything directly. Once everyone was in their seats, the teacher started talking. So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures and what you want to do with your lives, the teacher said. I could pass out some career aptitude tests, but why bother? I know you want to go to the hero track. Izuku winced as the class celebrated and cheered. It was true, he did want to get into the hero track, but he knew no one believed he could do it. Hey teach, don't lump me in with these losers. I'm the real deal, but these guys would be lucky to be a sidekick to some busted D-lister. Ha! You can't just say that. That was uncalled for, Katsuki. Shut up, extras. Kaken barked back. Oh, if I remember correctly, you're trying out for UA High, aren't you? The teacher said. As the class reacted in shock to the news that Kaken was trying for such a prestigious school, Kaken bragged about his abilities and how he'd be a great hero. People all across the world will know who I am, and it all starts with UA High. Oh yeah, Midoriya, don't you want to go to UA High too? The teacher said. Izuku muttered to himself as the class burst into jeers and laughter. That day after school, Kaken stole his notebook. I don't know what you think you're doing, Deku, but we're not done, he said. Give it back. Izuku said. Suddenly he was thankful that he left his notebook about his secret powers at home and only took the hero one to school. As Bakugo taunted him, Izuku pursed his lips. He'd never gotten the chance to observe Bakugo, so maybe. Bakugo exploded his notebook and tossed it out the window. Izuku started. All that work. Most top heroes have stories about them from their school days. I want the shine of being able to be called the only student to make it into UA from this garbage city junior high school. So don't even think of applying to UA, nerd, Bakugo said, putting a sizzling hand on his uniform. There was nothing Izuku could say. As Bakugo was walking away, Izuku said, "Observe. Bakugo Katsuki LVL, 19 none. Quirk, explosion. See stats and skills." "What was that, nerd?" Bakugo growled, turning around. "And nothing." Izuku squeaked. "Level 19? That's a full 6 levels above me. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there's actually another way. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof of the building." Bakugo said viciously. Izuku said nothing. "Damn it. I wanted to stand up to Kakin there, but the only thing that I ended up seeing was how much stronger he is than I am." Izuku shook his head and sighed. He couldn't believe that Kakin had said that to him. He grabbed his soggy but potentially salvageable notebook, feeling a bit depressed. Whatever. He'd just go home and then... Alert! Emergency quest activation. Emergency quest, danger under the bridge. Goal, survive the villain attack. Bonus, defeat the aggressor alone. Rewards? Bonus rewards? Wadash, Izuku barely managed to get that out of his mouth before he was attacked by green sludge. A medium-sized invisibility coat, just what I need, the sludge villain said, amusement in his voice. "Don't worry. I'm just going to take over your body. Calm down. It'll only hurt for a minute. You'll feel better soon." Izuku clawed at the sludge covering his mouth, but there wasn't anything he could do. His new quirk wasn't doing anything to save him. Maybe if he had unallotted stat points left he could put them into strength as a Hail Mary, but he didn't have any left. Alert. Damage taken. Type, asphyxiation, minus 23 HP. Your current struggles will make you more durable later. Plus 1 vit. He couldn't breathe. "You can't grab me, I'm made of fluid. Thanks for your help though. You're my hero. I didn't realize he was in the city, so I've got to get out fast," the sludge villain said. "My vision's getting all fuzzy. Am I dying? Someone help please." "It's all right now, young man. I'm here." Texas smash, he heard someone yell. Alert. Emergency quest has been completed. Collect rewards? Alert. Emergency bonus quest failed. Assisted in defeat of LVL. 26 enemy. Contribution level, minor. Plus 1300 XP. Izuku groaned. And ignored the text alerts that flitted across his vision as he felt someone slap his cheek. Hey, wake up. Oh good. Thought we lost you there." Izuku made a noise of involuntary surprise as he sat up from the pavement. "All Might. I'm glad you're okay. I'm sorry I caught you up in my villain fighting. It turns out the city sewer system is pretty difficult to navigate," All Might said, with a bellowing laugh. "But you were a big help. I captured him safely," he said, holding up a bottle that seemed to contain the sludge villain. Izuku was barely able to react. "A&A autograph," he started to say, but once he opened his notebook he realized All Might had already signed it. He already did. Thank you very much. I will treasure." As Izuku was babbling, he thought of a new opportunity, better than an autograph, that he could get from this. After all, knowing more about All Might would help Izuku write better quirk analysis of him. "Observe," Izuku whispered. "Yagi Tashinori LVL. 99 the symbol of peace. Quirk, 1 for all, transferred. See stats and skills. Active buff, quirked form, plus ease. Buff time limit, 3 minutes, 2's remaining." Izuku's jaw dropped. All Might's real name? Oh gosh, he hadn't even thought about how that would pop up. Wasn't that some kind of national secret? He probably shouldn't know that his name was Yagi Tashinori. Not to mention the name of his quirk. 1 for all, and that buff, a time limit? His buff was called quirked form. Was All Might's quirk on a time limit? But how? All this information was probably extremely classified and he hadn't even thought of that part. If the villains ever found out All Might had a time limit. If that's what was even happening and Izuku wasn't misinterpreting, of course. Luckily, All Might seemed to take him saying, "Observe," as part of his incomprehensible hackneyed muttering, and seemed to take his awed, horrified silence as just a regular civilian reaction. "Okay, I gotta take this guy to the police. Stay out of trouble, see you around, All Might said. Wait, you're leaving already? Heroes are constantly fighting time as well as enemies. Now stand back, I'm taking off. Thanks for your continued support. All Might. But All Might was already gone. As he walked home from his encounter with All Might, Izuku glanced up at his alerts. It looks like I got XP from almost getting killed by that villain because apparently I technically contributed to his defeat. Not to mention the quest that he'd just completed. He had rewards to collect. Collect rewards, Izuku said. Danger under the bridge complete. Rewards hidden. Detect enemy's skill, LVL, 1, plus 8 stat points, plus 2100 XP. Alert. Level up. You are now LVL, 14. A new skill, Izuku muttered. XP, and some stat points. Izuku was most curious about his new skill. Skills, Izuku said. Glancing through his skill list, he noticed a new skill added at the bottom. Detect enemies, LVL. 1 say, detect enemies allowed to. Detect anyone with the enemy, relationship, or the bloodlust status effect within a 5-foot radius. That looked sort of useful if he wanted to figure out if someone was trying to kill him or not. But a 5-foot radius was kind of small, so the enemy would have to be right on top of him if he wanted it to work. Not to mention that he would have to literally say, detect enemies allowed? Maybe the radius would expand if he leveled up the skill. It was probably not worth getting almost murdered for. But he supposed it wasn't going to hurt to have it. Stats, Izuku said. Vit, 13, STR, 6, Dex, 10 Int, 25, Wis, 14, Cha, 11. Unallotted stat points, 13. 13 new stat points to play with. He would wait to put those into something later. For now, he needed a game plan for how he was going to improve his stats fast enough for the UA entrance exams. Izuku was doing push-ups. Well, he'd done a couple of regular push-ups before he'd gotten far too tired, so he switched to doing push-ups on his knees instead, which was mildly embarrassing. But he just had to keep going until he confirmed. Using your muscles makes them stronger. +1. Izuku collapsed to the ground, panting. So, working out increases your strength, Izuku huffed, scribbling that down in his notebook. He'd suspected it strongly, but it was important to test. So far, he'd confirmed that Quirk analysis increased WIS, that running increased DX, that taking damage, almost getting murdered, increased VIT, and that working out increased STR. All he had left to figure out was INT and he had a few ideas on how to test those out. But first, Izuku grabbed the green tea that was just within reach and chugged the cup. He felt some of his tiredness and muscle soreness vanish, the -20 exhaustion from the item taking effect. Izuku pulled out his homework and got to trying to increase his INT. After ages studying, Izuku finally managed to increase his INT by 1 point. It seemed like trying to learn new things, both memorizations and new techniques, was the factor that increased intelligence, just as he had suspected. Something else was quickly becoming apparent, though, and that was discrepancies between the times it took to increase certain stats. He'd been able to increase strength and dexterity fairly quickly, but the less said about the time it took to gain 1 intelligence point the better. Was it the activities themselves, or? Stats, Izuku muttered. Vit, 13, STR, 7, Dex, 10 Int, 26, Wis, 14, Cha, 11. Unallotted stat points, 13. Do they increase on a curve? Izuku muttered to himself. It would explain why it was easy to get STR and DX, things he didn't have that much of, but hard to get INT, which he had a lot of. His theory was that the more points he gained in a stat, the harder it would be to get more after that. It was just a working theory for now, but one that Izuku feared would be the truth. If it were the case, it would be very easy for his progress to plateau. An eye on that, Izuku muttered to himself, writing down a note. Record how much time it takes to increase certain stats as opposed to others, to test that theory. If stats did increase on a curve, that meant he should grind up all his stats as high as they would go before adding his unallotted stat points to them, because once they were higher they would be tougher to increase. Which meant dumping all those points in intelligence had probably been a bad idea. Well, On the bright side, he'd noticed that he learned much faster and retained a significant amount more than usual when he was studying, so if nothing else, at least he'd gained that. Bakugo shoved him up against the wall. Izuku winced as he hit the bricks. Alert! Damage taken. -2 HP. Kaken, Izuku tried. You haven't withdrawn your application to UA, nerd? He snarled. Bakugo's bullying had gotten a lot worse since that day. He apparently hadn't gotten over learning that Izuku was truly trying for UA, especially considering he still thought Izuku was quirkless. Izuku hissed in pain as Bakugo used his quirk to singe his arm. Alert! Damage taken. Type, fire, -8 HP. He knew it wasn't that much HP, nothing a few green teas couldn't fix, but it still stung very badly. Burns hurt. Detect enemies, Izuku said. Alert! Enemy detected. Why do you keep saying that? Bakugo demanded. Also, maybe the fact that Izuku kept saying detect enemies was contributing to the fact he was getting bullied, but he needed to level up this skill. And Bakugo was the only enemy he had, even if he was technically classified as a petty enemy. Detect enemies, Izuku replied. Alert! Enemy detected. Your observation of others increases your people skills. +1 cha. Bakugo screamed in frustration. Izuku stumbled to class bruised and a little singed, but the teacher paid him little mind. At this point Bakugo's bullying had become routine, and neither he nor the teacher wanted to go through the official procedures that were supposed to take place whenever one student assaulted another. They tried doing that before, and nothing had ever been done. Honestly, if the teacher took him to the office every time somebody pushed him around, no one would get any learning done. Observe, Izuku muttered as quietly as he could, using his abilities to scan students around the classroom. Even though he was trying to be quiet and non-obtrusive, he knew that doing this all the time would probably make him look weirder than he already did. And he was already known as the weird kid. Observe skill leveled up to level 5. Izuku resisted a sigh. Sometimes he just wished that he could be normal like all the other kids with quirks. He wished his quirk had come in on time? No, more like he wished he had a regular, normal quirk. This one was so finicky and he didn't know anything about it, and it came in so late, and he probably wouldn't be able to convince anyone of it, so having a quirk now didn't increase his social status. The only thing that his quirk was good for was letting him know how much his classmates hated him. -31 rep, moderate hostility. If only he could convince everyone he had a quirk. Then maybe he'd finally get some friends around here. Get into UA 7-step plan. Grind Dick's stat by going on daily runs. Grind SD or stat by doing push-ups and sit-ups every day. Work on WIS by doing quirk analysis in spare time. At school, go for C by practicing observe and detect enemy skills. V might increase on its own with Kaken attacking me all the time. Grind INT with extra studying. Important, how will I explain my quirk? Could I pass it off as something else? That would be committing fraud. But it would be easier than trying to become a quirkless hero. Maybe I could actually make some friends at UA if everyone knew I had a quirk. I want other people to respect me. Chapter text. Izuku finished his morning run feeling exhausted. Stats, he said. Vit, 14, STR, 12, Dex, 15, Int, 28, Wis, 17, Cha, 15. Unallotted stat points, 13. He'd been training his stats for the past month, trying to increase them as much as he could. It had worked well enough. He had improved by at least 1 point in every area, even intelligence and vitality, 2 of his hardest stats to level. And the system was real. It was hard for Izuku to believe, but these stat bonuses had basically provided confirmation that his quirk worked. Izuku's strength had gone from 6 to 12 since he started, and in real life his strength truly had doubled, with him able to lift heavy things he'd never been able to before. With a strength stat of 12, he was actually only a little below average in strength for his age group, where he had been severely below average before. Not to mention that the intelligence bonus had been a godsend. He hadn't realized it within the first few days of getting the boost, but adding 10 points to his intelligence worked great. His memorization and recall, in particular, was stellar. He barely needed to spend any time on subjects that were mostly memorization. He was leveling faster than ever in Quirk analysis, too, probably the result of his intelligence bonus. He was proud of how far he'd come in that area since he'd gotten the gamer. But, to his dismay, through grinding for stats this way, he'd confirmed his fear. Stat gains eventually happened less and less. The more points he had in a stat, the harder it was to level. That meant that despite a month where he studied ferociously, he'd only managed to gain 2 intelligence stat points, because his INT was already so high. Vitality was another one that was tough to level. Vitality seemed to require serious injury to actually make any progress toward increasing it. Bakugo didn't hurt him badly enough for him to increase VIT in any significant way, probably because Bakugo didn't want a mark on his record that would threaten his potential enrollment at UA. And speaking of school, the social rejection had increased tenfold since he'd started muttering, observe, and detect enemies under his breath all the time. It was weird, he knew it was weird, but school was the best time to level those 2 stats and his charisma. Yet he was getting bullied more than ever, and it was becoming unbearable. He needed to come up with a fake quirk soon. Then people would leave him alone, right? He didn't think he could last another day of this. But at least his stats were increasing. There was always that. Detect enemies, Izuku muttered dully. Alert, enemy detected. The range of detect enemies seemed to increase 1 foot per level, so at LVL 6, it had a 10-foot range. More than enough to detect Bakugo from the other side of the classroom. Detect enemies, Izuku repeated quietly. Alert, enemies detected. Quantity, 2. Izuku froze. 2 enemies? He glanced around. No one new had entered the room. That meant someone in the classroom had recently become his enemy. Relationships. Relationships. Midoriya Inko, Rep plus unconditional love. Bakugo Katsuki, Rep, enemy. Type abusive. Bakugo Mitsuki, Rep plus friendly acquaintance. Bakugo Masaru, Rep plus friendly acquaintance. Classmates homeroom, Rep, enemy. Type petty. Izuku resisted the urge to bash his face on the table. It wasn't just one enemy, it was all his classmates. He had such a low reputation among his class that they were, as a group, being classified as his enemy. Izuku also noticed a change in Bakugo's classification. Enemy abusive type? That's ridiculous. Bakugo gets really mad, sure, but that's just his personality. Abusive is an exaggeration. Izuku decided to put it out of his mind. Detect enemies. Alert, enemies detected. Quantity, 2. Detect enemies skill leveled up to level 7. Oh, that was a fast level up. Maybe having more enemies in close proximity helped the skill level faster? That's all for now, class, the teacher said, putting down his chalk. Make sure you finish the reading by Monday so we can discuss it during class. Izuku got up absent-mindedly, putting all his books away. He was excited to go straight home and work on his favorite thing, quirk analysis, as well as further strength training. Hey, it was Midoriya, right? A voice said. Izuku turned around and glanced at the person speaking to him with surprise. You're the new transfer, aren't you? That's right, he said, nodding. The name's Nakano Izanagi. Oh, it's nice to meet you, Nakano-kun, Izuku said, feeling a swell of emotions within him. On one hand, this was probably the most civil conversation he'd had with someone who wasn't his mom in a month. On the other hand, talking to him was social suicide, and if the transfer didn't know that, Izuku didn't want to ruin his chances at making friends. Walk with me, Nakano said, and Izuku found himself nodding. So how was your first D-Day? Izuku said as he followed, stumbling over his words. It was nice, he said with a smirk. How was your day? Fine, Izuku managed. Glad to hear it, Nakano answered easily. Now, riddle me this. Why do you say, observe, under your breath in class all the time? Observe. Izuku echoed, and the skill involuntarily activated. Nakano Izanagi LVL, 15 none. Quirk, Enthrall. See stats and skills. Yeah, I was wondering, he said. But that didn't make a lot of sense. Izuku had gotten much better at whispering quietly so others couldn't hear him. It was mostly on the first few days of practicing with his quirk that everyone realized he was saying, "observe," all the time. Besides, Nakano sat far away from him, so he shouldn't have been able to hear during class. Meaning he'd heard about it from someone else. If he had heard about Izuku from someone else, that meant he probably knew Izuku was quirkless. Just a nervous tick, Izuku responded hesitantly. Nakano stopped in the middle of the hallway. "What is it?" Izuku started. He stopped dead in his tracks after Nakano looked him in the eye. His eyes were transfixing. The light inside them almost seemed to be swirling and dancing. Izuku stared at them intently. An alert popped up, a message from his quirk, but Izuku ignored it, because it didn't seem important. A hand grasped his shirt and he felt himself being dragged somewhere, but Nakano's eyes, so pretty, so distracting. Suddenly, everything snapped back into focus. Izuku quickly glanced at the alerts that had popped up while he was out of it. Alert. Debuff hypnosis. Applied. Alert. Debuff hypnosis. Timed out. Izuku found himself standing in the supply closet instead of the hallway. In front of him was Nakano, at the supply closet door. "Why dash?" Izuku started, but Nakano shut the door in his face. "Hey! Let me out!" Izuku yelled, pounding a fist on the door a few times. He heard multiple voices on the other side, though it was muffled. "Trapped the quirkless freak just like we asked. Maybe you're worthy of." So, it was a setup, Izuku thought, internally growling. The fact that the class moved to enemy status was more of a warning than I ever knew. Izuku tried the door. It wouldn't open. Sighing, Izuku resigned himself to being stuck in here for a bit. Pounding on the door wouldn't make anyone particularly inclined to let him out sooner, and would only serve to entertain his bullies. Izuku took a step back and tripped over a broom, unable to see where he was going in the dark. He stumbled into a shelf, knocking over everything that was on it with several loud clatters and bangs. He heard jeering from the other side of the door at the loud noises. The sound of something cylindrical rolling and splashing liquids hitting the ground was of more immediate interest, though, as was the acrid scent that hit his nose. "That smells awful, and kind of like cleaning supplies. Did I spill bleach or something?" Izuku was a bit worried now, still unable to see, with his eyes watering from the smell of whatever he'd just spilled. Fumbled around for the light switch, he heard another clatter and more splashing, and cursed internally at whatever just fell. Alert! Emergency quest activation. Emergency quest. Chemical spill. Goal: survive the dangerous fumes. Bonus: survive at above half health. Rewards? Bonus rewards? Sheet. Izuku said, rushing to the door. "A chemical spill? Hey! Let me out!" He heard snickers and laughter on the other end of the door. Some cleaning supplies spilled and got mixed together. "Which is dangerous," Izuku shouted through the door. There was a moment of silence and then more talk from the students. "What's he talking about, Dash? Making up stories, Dash. How does Dash? Probably just afraid, Dash." No one opened the door, and the smell of whatever was filling the room grew more noxious. "Guys, please?" Izuku shouted. "Let's just leave him in there for a bit. He's obviously desperate, and a liar too," a voice said, one that Izuku recognized as belonging to one of his crueler classmates. "We'll let him out after basketball practice." A few people voiced their agreement, and Izuku heard his classmates shuffling away from the closet. "Wait please," Izuku shouted. "Alert! Damage taken. Type: poison. -10 HP. Warning: poison damage incurs exhaustion." Izuku broke into a coughing fit as he gave up pounding on the door. He trailed his hand along the wall with urgency, finally managing to find the light switch. Finally, with the lights on, he glanced back at what had spilled. Bleach and drain cleaner. Definitely not two things one should mix. Izuku put his shirt over his mouth to use like an impromptu mask, and started looking for a way out. Alert! Damage taken. Type: poison. -13 HP. He tried kicking the door as hard as he could, but it was a new door and thick. His kicks barely affected it. He tried messing around with the door handle, but while it would move up and down, the door wouldn't open. Had they jammed it from the other side? Alert! Damage taken. Type: poison. 11 HP. Your current struggles will make you more durable later. Plus 1 vit. He could try putting all his unallotted stats into STR and then kicking the door down. But this was such a well-built door that he severely doubted it would work. He honestly just didn't have enough unallotted stat points to take down the door. But he would try it if nothing else worked. Alert, damage taken. Type, poison, -7 HP. But there was probably another way to get through. If he remembered correctly, he might be able to remove the hinges from the door if he could loosen the hinge pins enough. But he needed tools to remove the hinges, he couldn't just do it by hand. Alert, damage taken. Type, poison, -8 HP. Your problem-solving activity increased your wisdom. Plus 1 wis. He quickly glanced around the room and took stock of everything in it. In the back of it, the toolkit. Izuku snatched the toolkit and found exactly what he needed in it. A screwdriver, a hammer, and some nails. This would work. Alert, damage taken. Type, poison, -11 HP. Warning. You are at above 50% exhaustion. He grabbed the screwdriver and started pushing the hinge pins up out of the hinges. The first 2 went easily, but the last one got stuck. Alert, damage taken. Type, poison, -8 HP. Izuku quickly used the hammer to strike up at it, and it fell loose. Quicker than Izuku anticipated, he had gotten all 3 hinges out of the way. The door came loose, and he quickly tossed it aside. Alert, damage taken. Type, poison, -4 HP. The thing that had been jamming the door was a big doorstop, which had prevented the door from moving when he pushed it. Izuku stepped over the doorstop and stumbled out, coughing. Alert. Emergency quest has been completed. Collect rewards? Alert. Emergency bonus quest has been completed. Collect rewards? He staggered away from the dangerous gases as quickly as he could, managing to spit out, profile, as he headed towards the nurse's office. Midoriya Izuku LVL, 14 age, 14. HP, 78 150. Exhaustion, 523 750. Title, Fun. Quirk, the Gamer. Stats, Skills, Inventory, Relationships, Quest Log. Izuku was shocked at how low his health had gotten so quickly. I was in that closet for under 2 minutes after the spill, and I'm barely above half health. That means if I'd taken another 2 minutes to get out? Izuku felt a chill down his spine at the thought. And my exhaustion is higher than I've ever seen it go before. Poison must be especially dangerous for me if it causes my exhaustion to skyrocket like that. As he arrived at the nurse's office, spots swam across his vision. He fell to his knees. "Oh dear," the nurse said, blinking in surprise. "What happened?" "Supply closet, mixed chemicals," breathed in, Izuku managed, before slumping against the wall. "I'll call an ambulance," the nurse said, a panicked look on her face. Despite feeling like he was going to pass out from low oxygen, or high exhaustion, or something, Izuku knew that he wasn't going to die. He wasn't at 0 HP yet, but he didn't say so to the nurse. She wouldn't understand. He simply nodded and allowed her to panic. Izuku was rushed to the hospital. He decided to wait to collect his quest rewards for now. As exciting as it was that he'd completed another quest, he honestly just couldn't focus on that right now. An oxygen mask was put on his face immediately, which made him feel much better, and hospital staff seemed relieved that he was capable of breathing without mechanical ventilation. Still, they ran a battery of tests to check the state of his lungs, his sinuses, as well as testing his blood for chemicals. They gave him some medicines to help with his symptoms and his poisoning. Izuku felt unfocused, so he didn't try to understand the ins and outs of what was going on. He just let the doctors do their work. His mother rushed in after a few hours of this, looking frantic. "Is he okay?" The doctor set down his clipboard. "We still have a lot more tests to run to check for damage to his lungs and other organs. But what we have so far looks promising. We want him to stay overnight for observation, so we can process the rest of the results." "Oh, poor baby, I'm sorry I took so long," his mom said. "The school's call didn't go through until late in the day, I didn't know." "It's okay, Mom," Izuku said, giving her hand a pat. "The school wants to talk to you tomorrow if you're able to come in," she said, "so that they can figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again." but we can schedule that meeting later if you aren't feeling well. A meeting with the school principal? Just what I needed. Izuku thought to himself, trying to repress his frustration. That's fine, Izuku said. We'll see how he's feeling in the morning, ma'am, the doctor said. Don't be afraid to take some extra days to rest. He talked with his mom for a little bit, expertly dodging all her questions about exactly how he'd ended up stuck in the supply closet after spilling tons of chemicals. Honestly, he just didn't want to get into it right now. It wasn't long after that visiting hours closed down. Though his mom wrung her hands anxiously, Izuku insisted firmly that he was just fine and that she could go home and sleep. He promised to text her as soon as he woke up in the morning, in fact. It took a while to convince her, but he managed. Emergency quest, collect rewards, Izuku muttered once the nurses were gone. Chemical spill complete. Rewards hidden, plus 3 stat points, plus 7100 XP. Alert. Level up. You are now LVL 15. Alert. Level up. You are now LVL 16. Collect bonus quest rewards? That much XP, and 2 level ups? That was great. Maybe emergency quests weren't so bad after all. It wasn't the worst consolation prize for almost dying, he supposed. And he still had the bonus to collect. Bonus quest, collect rewards? Izuku tried. Chemical spill bonus quest complete. Rewards hidden. Title Broken Chemist, plus 1000 XP. And he got a title. He wasn't sure what titles did, but he was very excited. Even Kaken didn't have one. Did bonus quests usually give titles, or did they give other things like stat points? How random were his prizes? Alert! Tutorial quest activation. Tutorial quest part 2, titles. Say, titles, allowed to look at your available titles. Say, equip title name, to equip a title. Rewards, plus 100 XP. There's the tutorial quest. Izuku shouted, barely managing to shut himself up even after remembering he was in a hospital at night. Titles. Titles available. Broken Chemist. While this title is equipped, the player takes half damage from poisons, toxins, and other corrosive substances. Izuku broke into a grin. Broken Chemist looked pretty useful. He would love to be immune to poisons. It would have been really useful to have before this whole closet situation. Equip Broken Chemist, Izuku said. Tutorial quest part 2 complete. Rewards, plus 100 XP. Profile, Izuku said. Midoriya Izuku LVL, 16 age, 14. HP, 138-150. Exhaustion, 42-750. Title, Broken Chemist. Quirk, the Gamer. Stats, Skills, Inventory, Relationships, Quest Log. So now I have a title of my very own, Izuku murmured. If he ever spontaneously came in contact with some kind of toxin, he would be good to go. What an oddly comforting thought. Aside from that, he'd also improved in vitality and wisdom, plus he had lots of unallotted stat points now. Stats, Izuku said. Vit, 15, STR, 12, Dex, 15 Int, 28, Wis, 18, Cha, 15. Unallotted stat points, 26. What had just happened was horrible, and Izuku still shivered when he remembered how close he'd been to death. But at least he had more stat points. The next day, all his tests came back indicating that Izuku was in healthy working order. He had many doctors and nurses tell him about how lucky he'd been not to suffer any permanent lung or brain damage from the harmful chemicals he'd been exposed to. Izuku wasn't sure how much of that was luck, and how much of that was, my HP was restored so I'm fine now, but either way he was grateful. Knowing that he was fine, he went home to assure his mom and give her a hug and hang out with her a bit before heading to school midday. She told him it was fine if he stayed home the whole day, but in truth Izuku wanted to get the meeting with the principal out of the way. He didn't want to be stressing all of tonight about it. Then, tonight, after he met with the principal, he would get his rewards from the emergency quest and figure out what to do with them. It would be something to look forward to. After walking down the hall, the whole hallway where the chemical spill had taken place was cordoned off. He poked his head into the principal's office. Come in, she said, giving Izuku a nod. Izuku sat in the uncomfortable wooden chair across the desk from her. We wanted to ask you how you'd been doing. Of course, seeing what happened, the principal said smoothly. I'm fine, Izuku said stiffly. I'll recover. Oh good. Well, now keep in mind, this is why students aren't permitted in the supply closets. We have rules for a reason, Midoriya-kun. I didn't go there on purpose, Izuku snapped. Oh. The principal raised an eyebrow. Someone locked me in there, Izuku mumbled. And what student would do that? She asked. Nakano Izanagi, Izuku muttered. Why Nakano? On his first day as a transfer, the principal said. Yes, Izuku ground out. He used enthrall to drag me in the closet. That's a big accusation, Midoriya, the principal said. Assault with a quirk is no joke. Are you sure you want to accuse Nakano-kun of that? It's the truth, Izuku said. Oh. If that's the case, then how did you learn the name of Nakano's quirk? The principal asked, skepticism in her voice. Since Nakano has been discriminated against for his quirk in the past, we made sure to keep it a secret and not announce it to the class. If he was planning on attacking you, like you said, I doubt he told you about it, the principal said. Izuku bit his tongue. If he said that Nakano told him, the principal either wouldn't believe him or he'd use it as evidence against him. And he couldn't say he learned it from observe. I guessed based on what the quirk did, Izuku said. Well, that's lucky, isn't it? The principal said, shaking her head. She leaned forward, face serious and unamused. Listen, Midoriya. I'll tell you what I think happened. Izuku set his jaw and nodded. I think you researched what Nakano's quirk was in advance, and then used that information to make up a story for attention, the principal said. As Izuku opened his mouth to reject, the principal slammed a hand against the desk. Quiet. Your story doesn't add up. If this really was a random attack like you said, then you shouldn't know that his quirk is called enthrall. Your explanation of lucky guess is flimsy, she said. The principal's reasoning made some amount of sense, but Izuku couldn't help but feel like she was unfairly biased against him. Izuku said nothing. There wasn't anything he could do to contradict her at this point. The principal shook her head and sighed as if disappointed. Izuku, this isn't the first time you've been in altercations with your classmates. Before we've only laid out minor consequences because there wasn't much proof against you, but I'm very disappointed that you targeted a new student like this. Such a serious false accusation must result in DSPLN. Izuku bit his lip. He should have just shut up and stayed quiet, but whatever. He could handle this, he could handle detention, or even suspension just fine. We're going to need to put a black mark on your record, the principal said. Izuku jolted in his seat. Wait dash. A black mark was the worst kind that Aldera gave out on their middle school records, usually for violent offenses. He knew that if a black mark was placed on his record that his chances of getting into UA would plummet. It would be possible to get in, technically. But it was UA policy to inquire into serious offenses on student records, and consider them during the application process. Which meant that even if he passed the entrance exam, UA would hear from Aldera that he had falsely accused another student of injuring him with their quirk. Considering how serious attacking someone with your quirk was, UA would never let him in if they believed that he'd levied that kind of false accusation. Especially if the principal implied he'd done it because he discriminated against Nakano's quirk. That's not necessary, Izuku insisted. I think it is, the principal said. Unless you can prove to me that what you're saying is the truth, I'm going to be forced to punish you for your false accusation. It was, Izuku started, but he couldn't finish the sentence. It was what, Midoriya? The principal said impatiently. It was my quirk. Izuku said. You don't have dash. It's called observe. Izuku interrupted. I can tell someone's name and quirk just by looking at them. I've had it for as long as I can remember, but for a long time I didn't realize it was abnormal to sense someone's quirk and name by looking. You're lying, you're quirkless, the principal said, eyes sharp. I can prove it. Izuku said, desperately. Please let me prove it. There was a long silence, in which Izuku breathed heavily after his shouting fit. Okay, the principal said. All right, let's see if you can prove it. Observe, Izuku said under his breath as he looked at the man in the coat. Tabata now LVL. 22 none. Quirk, healing boost. See stats and skills. Tabata now, Izuku said. His quirk is healing boost. Then, he glanced at the woman with the scarf. Observe. Kawada KO LVL. 27 none. Quirks. See stats and skills. Kawada KO, Spark, Izuku said. The principal had asked a few people from the new maintenance crew to come over for the test, to see if Izuku really could guess everyone's name and quirk. Luckily, Izuku actually did have the ability to do so. My God, the principal breathed. You do have a quirk. Call his mom, Kawada suggested. Get him to an appointment with a quirk physician. I will, the principal said with a short nod. Izuku sank into his car seat as his mother chattered on the way to the doctor. To think that you actually had a quirk this whole time, she said. It was clear why she was excited, and Izuku could understand why. She was excited that Izuku's life would get easier. Frankly, Izuku knew that she'd always been afraid of how the world would treat her poor, baby boy, considering that he was different. Izuku was a little excited, just like his mom. To have a quirk would be lovely, and maybe it would help him get along with his classmates. But he'd really jumped the gun on this decision. Once he registered Observe, that was it. He wished he'd had more time to think about what quirk he wanted to fake. He would have to completely revamp his plans for getting into hero school. He'd been planning to give himself a strength quirk, but he could work with this. Observe was a decent quirk for a hero. It would allow them to instantly bust any villain's secret identity and immediately know the quirk of any villain they thought. So very useful. But it wasn't flashy, which was a bummer. A non-flashy quirk would make it tougher to break out of the industry. Hello, Midoriya, the doctor greeted as they entered. He was a kindly-looking old man with round glasses and a mustache. They'd called the same one that had been his quirk doctor at age 4, when he'd been pronounced quirkless. I hear you've had some kind of quirk manifestation, or at least revelation. I don't do quirk evaluations much anymore, but since I was the one to diagnose you quirkless in the first place, well, why don't you come down to my office? Izuku and his mom followed him into his office, which was tightly packed full of little trinkets and equipment. Now, why don't you give me a quick rundown of what happened, he said. Midoriya tried his best to explain. I don't think my quirk was late to manifest. I think that I was just never quirkless. Ever since I was a kid, as long as I can remember, I've been able to tell someone's name and quirk just by looking at them. Since it was my whole life, I thought it was normal. But I think it's my quirk. Interesting, the doctor said, scribbling something onto his clipboard. How does the information appear to you? It just sort of gets injected into my brain, Izuku explains. Makes more intuitive sense than writing appearing in midair, so I'll just twist the truth about that part. I have an idea. As a preliminary test, why don't you tell me my name and quirk? The doctor asked. Observe, Izuku muttered. Kyudai Garaki LVO, 76 Shadow of the Demon. Quirk, Life Force Copy. See stats and skills. Kyudai Garaki, and your quirk is Life Force, Izuku said, despite his initial awe at seeing such a high level on the doctor. How impressive! And why is his quirk listed as a copy? It kind of reminds me of the transferred label I saw next to All Might's quirk. I wonder what it means. Kyudai? I thought your name was Tsubasa, his mom said, confused. I got a name change in my youth. Tsubasa now, but used to be Kyudai, the doctor said, waving his hand dismissively. But no matter. You're entirely correct. Very impressive. But didn't we discount the possibility of a quirk because Izuku has the double-toe joint? Inko asked. Izuku tensed slightly, waiting for the doctor's response. Yes, we did, he sighed. But you see, quirklessness and the toe joint are only linked genes, not caused by the same gene. That means they're affiliated most of the time, but there's a very small chance that you can have both a quirk and the toe joint, like Izuku here, for instance. Ah, I see, Inko said, sounding uncertain, and probably not understanding the science behind it. I apologize for not doing further testing, but it really is rare, less than 1%, and since he wasn't showing any indications of a quirk anyways, Kyudai said, voice apologetic. It's all right, Izuku intervened. It's fine, I'm just glad we have it figured out now. A smile returned to his mother's face. I am glad for that. What else do we have to do? There is some additional testing you'll need to go through to confirm your quirk, and then we'll have to register it legally, Kyudai said, with a patronizing smile. It might be a good idea to put you in quirk counseling as well. Izuku smiled weakly, while his mom beamed. Izuku received some additional testing in order to get his quirk registered. He had to guess the names and quirks of random volunteers, which he did right every time. He even leveled up Observe once, not that it really affected his performance. Once he'd done this, Dr. Kyudai, Tsubasa, promised he would start working on the paperwork he'd need to submit for his quirk to become officially registered. But before that, one more thing, Kyudai said just as Izuku thought he was done. I'm supposed to ask, how would you feel about doing some additional intelligence testing? Intelligence testing? Why? Izuku asked. Some quirks have auxiliary effects, he explained. This quirk, though primarily observatory in nature, technically also falls into the category of analysis quirk. Analysis quirks occasionally provide secondary intelligence boosts. If you take this test and get a high score, increased intelligence would be part of your quirk description. That sounded great, Izuku said. Good. That would give me something extra to sell to hero schools besides, can tell a person's name quirk. Having boosted intelligence might actually make me a way more competitive applicant. I'll go print you a test, the doctor said. As he left, Izuku sat down at one of the chairs and thought about making a potentially rash decision. Stats, he said. Vit, 15, STR, 12, Dex, 15 Int, 28, Wis, 18, Cha, 15. Unallotted stat points, 26. Is my intelligence actually good enough to make a big difference on the test? He muttered to himself. He hoped it was. This might end up being kind of important for his hero resume, and it would also let him explain his boosted intelligence if he heightened it significantly in the future. I could add unallotted stat points to intelligence for a boost, Izuku thought to himself. Intelligence is kind of getting out of the ballpark where I can improve it naturally anyways. The whole point of how he was using his quirk was to get into hero school, right? This was basically improving his chances. With that in mind, Izuku's choice was decided. 13 unallotted stat points to intelligence, he said. Vit, 15, STR, 12, Dex, 15 Int, 41, Wis, 18, Cha, 15. Unallotted stat points, 13. Perfect. 41 intelligence had to be high enough. He'd felt like a genius with how fast he could learn at 28. The doctor came back with a test, along with a pack of pencils, before long. Izuku took the pencils and the test and glanced at it, ready to crush this test and get plausible deniability for having really high intelligence in the future. Which is why he almost dropped his pencil when he saw it seemed to be an exam that focused almost solely on testing the critical thinking and problem-solving of the person in question. Problem-solving is wisdom. Why did they call this an intelligence test? Izuku wanted to bang his head against the table. Did he seriously make the mistake of mixing up intelligence and wisdom again? His wisdom wasn't even that great. How was he supposed to do well? Well, sure it was high and getting to the point where it was difficult to grind it much higher, but Izuku sighed. 13 stat points to wisdom. Vit, 15, Esther, 12, Dex, 15 Int, 41, Wis, 31, Cha, 15. Unallotted stat points, 0. Well, now that he was done wasting a bunch of his stat points by mistake, hopefully he'd actually be able to get a good score on this awful test. He put pencil to paper and did his. The test had been hard, but not that hard. Izuku was hoping that was a good sign, considering it was supposed to test if you got some kind of boost, so maybe it was hard on purpose, and the fact that he'd found it medium hard was a good sign? Kyudai promised him that his test, and the rest of his paperwork, would be processed within a few business days, and therefore he was good to go. He went in the car with his mom, who was making celebratory katsudon to celebrate, and sighed. I had to make a lot of impulsive decisions today, but boosting my highest stats was probably the best idea anyway given the curve on stat point gains. I think I'll just focus on grinding my other 4 stats for now, and improving skills. I wonder what my classmates will think, now that I have a quirk. His classmates weren't exactly happy with him. Not really. Still, their anger at him was withdrawn, subdued. But he'd been the pariah of his class for so long that it seemed like he was always destined to be, at the very least, mildly unpopular. Part of him was angry about what happened, but, well, he understood they hadn't meant to kill him, only keep him locked in the closet for a few hours. So it was a little bit like an accident, right? It was nothing like an accident, but thinking in those terms made Izuku feel better. Basically, all of the bullying had stopped, though. Whether it was because they'd received some kind of dressing down from the teachers or because they'd felt bad about what happened, Izuku wasn't sure. Maybe they were just too afraid to bully him any longer after what happened to Nakano. Nakano had gotten a black mark on his record for attacking another student. Izuku was stunned that Nakano actually faced real consequences. He'd thought maybe he'd get detention for a few days and then they'd forget about it, but no. Nakano's wrongdoings were actually documented. He supposed that now that there was a story behind his odd interest in quirks and his strange mannerisms, and that he had an explanation for how he knew about Nakano's quirk, he was believed. It was kind of ironic. The punishment that the principal had threatened him with was the one that had been levied against Nakano. Sure, Nakano technically hadn't any punishment, like getting suspended, but this was good enough. Izuku hadn't had very much of an expectation for that anyways, considering the teacher had barely even believed him. It was fine. It wasn't. Something very interesting was what had happened with his classmates' reputation. It was still in the high 20s, which left him on edge, but it was now labeled unsure instead of enemy, which was something at least. Relationships. Midoriya Inko, Rep plus unconditional love. Bakogu Katsuki, Rep, enemy. Type abusive. Bakogu Mitsuki, Rep plus friendly acquaintance. Bakogu Masaru, Rep plus friendly acquaintance. Classmates' homeroom, Rep, unsure. Strangely, Bakogu's rep had actually gotten a little better too. Only by, like 10, but still. Frankly, Bakogu was still kinda mean. He glared at him across the classroom and insulted him loudly, even calling his new quirk useless. But he never attacked him or messed with his stuff anymore. When his friends asked him why, Bakogu loudly announced that he wouldn't be getting a mark on his record, like dumbass Nakano, since he had to get into UA, but Izuku got the sense that Bakogu was letting him off easy. Izuku didn't think that Bakogu felt bad about what happened to Izuku, not exactly, but Bakogu did seem to be at the very least thrown by what had happened. It made Izuku feel better about their relationship that Bakogu hadn't been in the group who had locked him in the closet. To be honest, Izuku wanted his rep with Bakogu to improve. Still, he didn't know how to make that happen, so there wasn't much he could do on that front. He'd just have to hope that it would happen on its own. Izuku, your results are back, his mother called. Results for what? He asked, chomping on his noodles. Auxiliary testing for your quirk? She said, reading the envelope. Auxiliary? Wait, Izuku started. Was that the intelligence test? Inko tore open the seal. It says that the test results confirmed that quirk gives you an intelligence boost. How wonderful, baby. I always knew you were a smart cookie, she said, giving him a pat on the head. Then she handed him the envelope. Izuku scanned the letter eagerly. Apparently, with the score he got, he'd be listed as having a mild intelligence boost. Despite how he'd initially suggested the name Observe, his quirk would officially be called Analysis, and the description would be, Analysis lets the user know a person's name and quirk just by looking at them. It has the side effect of giving them a mild intelligence boost. Izuku sighed in relief. Good enough. They decided to call it Analysis rather than Observe because they thought it fit better, considering the quirk gave him an intelligence boost as well as letting him figure out someone's quirk and name. Technically Observe would be the more honest name in truth, but Analysis hit what he was trying to portray in his fake quirk better, so the name change would work just fine for him. So I'm finally registered, Izuku said. His mom smiled. Congratulations, sweetheart. Izuku glanced down at his plans to train for the UA exams. He needed completely new plans, now taking into account his new quirk and used stat points. Well, firstly, even though it was inefficient, he would have to boost his intelligence and wisdom as much as he could. Intelligence quirks were expected to grow with adolescence, so he was supposed to get smarter as time went on. While his growth didn't have to be perfect, it was hard to measure what intelligence really meant anyway, and it's not like anyone was breathing down his neck and monitoring his progress, but he should probably try to keep up appearances a little just in case, since he didn't want any suspicion. That would be hard to pull off though. It was hard to grind INT and WIS as it was. But he could grind related skills, right? He could probably work ahead a lot in math and chemistry, right? Physics, maybe? Learning new things for those would help him grind INT anyways, and if he practiced quirk analysis, he could bulk up his WIS while working on that skill specifically. And working ahead in academics would help him with the UA written regardless. As far as his other raw stats went, he'd need to improve his strength and dexterity a lot to be a hero. He'd continue his workout routine and keep going with his charisma practice during school. There wasn't much he could do for his vitality, though, since he wasn't planning on intentionally hurting himself for it. He could figure out what to do with that later. It's not like he was planning on getting in any fights anytime soon, so he'd basically have until he was out of internships before his low VIT became a risk. But regardless, he had a plan. Izuku felt a swell of determination. He could do this. He would do this. And he would keep his secret in the meantime. Izuku huffed, finishing his run. He'd been practicing for the past 9 months, and the UA entrance exam was tomorrow. He'd been training, but his stat changes had started to plateau the more he gained, which had stymied his progress. He was stronger, of course, he could feel it, but he wasn't sure if he was strong enough. Stats, Izuku said. Vit, 16, STR, 18, Dex, 20 Int, 43, Wis, 35, Cha, 21. Unallotted stat points, 0. It was decent, but, well, the UA entrance exam was tough. And since he had, as far as the law was concerned, a non-physical quirk that didn't boost his athletic potential, he needed to be in top condition. Izuku wasn't in top condition. He was above average, sure, but he wasn't amazing. So yeah, his training hadn't gone great exactly. On the bright side, he'd gotten very far ahead in math, chemistry, physics with his new INT boost. He'd even tried out a little computer coding. Such high intelligence was very conducive to learning. To be honest, his mistake when it came to adding more intelligence points had been a great boon to his academic career. He got A's on basically all his tests without trying. He hadn't gotten any quests, so no more XP, which meant there weren't any free stat points to put into anything. He'd just have to take the test with what he had right now. Oh, good luck, Izuku, his mother said fretfully, handing him a packed lunch. I'll be fine, Mom, Izuku said, despite feeling a bit worried himself. I'll do my best. That's all I can ask, she said, giving him a quick peck on the forehead. Izuku waved his mother goodbye and got on the train to take him to UA. The commute was only 10 minutes, another reason Izuku wanted to go to UA, so Izuku didn't take too long to get there and enter the school. Only to trip on the sidewalk as he was walking up to the testing building. Luckily, he was saved by a friendly girl who had brown hair, who used her quirk to float him up from the ground. Too nervous to say anything, he just stuttered in response to her. Afterwards, he managed to walk the rest of the way into the testing center. He took his seat a little numbly, before noticing that he was seated next to Bakugu, of all people. He tried to ignore the way that Bakugu growled at him. Once the testing center had filled up with examinees, Present Mike walked on stage and started to explain how the exam would be going. Izuku grinned upon seeing him. Observe, he muttered to himself. Yamada Hizashi LVL, 53 radio hero. See stats and skills. Izuku hummed in satisfaction. It wasn't any information he didn't already have on Present Mike, and Izuku's level was too low to look at the stats and skills, but he liked seeing it regardless. It made sense that Mike had the title Radio Hero too. Unfortunately, Present Mike was in the middle of explaining how the physical exam consisted of fighting robots. He winced internally at that. A strength score of 18 was probably not good enough to punch through metal, especially not thick metal. A robot fighting test did not bode well for him whatsoever. He puffed out a breath. I'll just have to do my best. You with the unkempt hair, a boy with glasses said. Izuku jolted out of his daydream. Huh. You've been muttering this entire time. You have to take this seriously. You're distracting the rest of us, he said strictly. Izuku shrank into himself as the students around them giggled and frowned. Once present Mike went back to answering the boy's question about how the fourth robot was an obstacle best avoided rather than fought. Izuku glared at the boy and muttered, "Observe. Ida Tenya LVL, 19 none. Quirk, engine. See stats and skills. No title, but he out-levels me," Izuku mumbled, but quickly shutting up so that the boy wouldn't notice and yell at him again. That last name, Ida, plus the Quirk, engine, was he related to Ingenium? There was no chance to ask. The exam was starting. As he walked to his new testing arena, Izuku wondered a little bit how mad the kid was with him. He supposed that if he was curious, there was a way to find out. Add Ida Tenya to relationships, Izuku whispered. Relationships. Relationships. Midoriya Inko, rep plus unconditional love. Bakogu Katsuki, rep, enemy. Type abusive. Bakogu Mitsuki, rep plus friendly acquaintance. Bakogu Masaru, rep plus friendly acquaintance. Classmates old homeroom, rep, very mild hostility. Ida Tenya, rep, slight disapproval. Izuku could have given a sigh of relief. It looked like he hadn't made a proper enemy out of the kid yet, it was just a little disapproval. -3 rep was nothing. Close. He wanted to go up and talk to the girl who had stopped him from falling on his face earlier, but Ida gave him a severe look from across the courtyard that stopped Izuku in his tracks. Why is he looking at me? Like that? Unluckily, at that exact same time, Present Mike yelled, "Go," for the exam to start. Izuku ran clumsily sprinted forward, just as white text jumped in front of his vision with a dinging noise. Alert! Heroics Quest activation. Heroics Quest, UA Physical Exam. Goal: pass the UA Physical Exam. Bonus: get first in the UA Physical Exam. Rewards? Bonus rewards? Close. Izuku said, ignoring it and continuing to sprint. He didn't have time to hem and haw over the quest right now, he just had to take the test. He ran forward and made a plan. Kids are doing pretty well this year, Hound Dog commented, scanning the screens. That one is certainly making significant progress, he said, pointing out the kid blowing up all the robots by explosion. Nedzu nodded. That one Bakugu Katsuki, by the name on his files, was obviously powerful and focused. He had high potential. Though it looked like he wasn't very keen on rescuing, judging by the way he'd only gotten villain points so far. Oh, and that one, Kiyama said. Look how stylish he is. Keeping a level head. She pointed to a blonde kid with sparkles shooting out of his stomach. Nedzu sighed, a bit bemused. This was the let's point out all the kids who we think look interesting part, in which all the teachers, except perhaps Aizawa, partook every single year. Nedzu for one didn't really understand why they didn't just wait until everyone had gotten in before getting all excited. Oh wow, look at that one. Yamada said, pointing to an examinee in Battle Center B. He's spearing the robots with that robot leg he got off another kid. Metal. He's going pretty fast, but not fast enough. He might get in, though, if he manages some decent rescue points, 13 said. What's his quirk? Aizawa pulled up the kid's profile on one of the computers. It's analysis, Aizawa said. It lets him know someone's name and quirk on sight. Additional mild intelligence boost as well. How are they spearing the robots with that piece of metal if they don't have a strength quirk? Yamada asked. He's aiming for the vulnerable area beneath the control panel, Nedzu said. On the 2 pointers. That's why he's going after them exclusively. Ah, that's clever. Looks like his quirk really does make him smarter. Yamada said, glancing back at Nedzu expectantly. Nedzu nodded, but he didn't feel as excited as Yamada thought he would be. Very few intelligence quirks among humans were anywhere close to being as powerful as high specs, which is why he had very few intellectual equals. To be honest, he wasn't really expecting much out of Midoriya's quirk, considering it was a secondary effect, instead of the function of the whole quirk itself, and was only strong enough to be listed as mild in the quirk description list. It was interesting that he'd found that weak point, though. Nedzu had put in a few weak points on purpose to ease Aizawa's legitimate complaints, but they were only ever utilized rarely. Let's unleash the zero-pointer, Kayama suggested. Nedzu nodded at that, breaking into a grin. He slammed the red button. Izuku panted, feeling exhausted. His legs and arm throbbed as he ran, destroying yet another robot by spearing it right under the control panel. He'd managed to obtain the metal spear thing after the sparkly kid had blown a three-pointer apart in front of him, and he'd managed to grab a sturdy-looking piece and use it to his advantage. It had taken him a little while to find the weak spots, but once he got started he was easily able to make a robot-destroying rhythm. But considering the point values the other kids were yelling out, Izuku worried that it wouldn't be enough. Only a few minutes left. There was a great rumbling, and a gigantic robot arose in the middle of the arena. Is that supposed to be the zero-pointer? Oh geez, Izuku started turning around about to run. But out of the corner of his eye he noticed a girl trapped in the rubble. Surely they know she's there, she won't get run over or anything, Izuku justified, wanting to run away. Still he felt guilty. She was the one who helped him before. And knowing he couldn't make it over there in time. As Ida ran by him, Izuku grabbed onto his arm. Wait! Izuku said, skidding a few feet. Ida slowed down, his engine sputtering out, and he whipped his head over and looked at Izuku like he was crazy. He pointed at the girl from earlier. Grab her! Ida's eyes set in determination, and he ran back, lifting the girl out of the rubble, before swinging around just as fast. The robot actually shut down once it got seriously close to the students, but by Izuku's estimates, Ida probably would have escaped even if the robot had kept plowing forward. He did feel a little silly once he saw the robot stop automatically, though. Obviously UA had their robots under control. Still, Izuku followed Ida as he ran back towards the entrance. That's it, boys and girls. The exam is over. Injured examinees, stay where you are. We're bringing medical to you. Present Mick's voice rang through the arena. Alert! Heroics quest has been completed. Collect rewards? Alert! Heroics bonus quest failed. Does that mean he got in? Did. Izuku barely managed to resist pumping his fist and literally cheering. He didn't even care that he didn't get in first place. He got in. He got in. He didn't think it would have been possible with a non-physical quirk like his, not with robots for a test. Collect rewards, he said. UA physical exam complete. Rewards hidden, plus 10 stat points, plus 100 XP. Stat points. Good enough. He could always use a few of those. That meant so long as he passed the written exam, he would be fine. Izuku grabbed his bag at the front and started walking inside to change. He'd brought an extra set of clothes to change into before the second part of the test, as had been recommended. And now that he was thinking about it, Izuku really wanted to pass the written exam by a large margin. Since he was faking an intelligence quirk, he didn't want to get a weak score and for everyone to think he was being lazy or that his quirk didn't do much. And, well, since he basically couldn't grind up WIS or INT anymore unlike his other stats, it would make a lot of strategic sense if he just 10 stat points to wisdom, he said. Stats. Vit, 16, STR, 18, Dex, 20, Int, 43, Wis, 45, Cha, 21. Unallotted stat points, 0. 45 was probably good enough, right? Wisdom was meant to represent problem-solving, so it should help him on the test. Was 45 a good number for a kid with a minor intelligence quirk? Probably. It would probably be fine. Stop stressing, Izuku ordered himself. Now changed into a new set of clothes, Izuku mentally prepared to take the written exam. The written exam was easy. Izuku hated to say it. It was fun, sure, and somewhat challenging, but he'd expected it to be a bit more difficult. Maybe because it was the heroics exam and not the general exam? No, the internet had told him that the two exams were virtually identical. Did I miss all the trick questions? Izuku wondered. Maybe I missed the complexities? Or, well, it is just a high school entrance exam. Were my preparations overkill? I mean, did I really need to go so many grade levels ahead in math? Maybe not. He was reluctant to say that for certain. UA had brought out a giant death robot for their physical exam, So who was to say? He was pretty sure he'd pass, though. And that's what counted. Glancing down at the written exam in his paws, Nezu had to admit that his low expectations had undersold Midoriya's abilities. He grinned. At the very least, Midoriya was worth keeping an eye on. There's one more thing, Nezu said in the middle of their staff meeting. We need to change things regarding Midoriya. What do you mean? Aizawa asked, giving Nezu a look. Midoriya's quirk allows him to know a person's name and quirk on sight, Nezu said cheerfully. If he sees All Might, Yagi's civilian cover would be blown immediately. Which is something of an issue, considering All Might is supposed to be Midoriya's heroics instructor. Ouch, Hound Dog muttered. Yeah. How do we deal with that? Yamada asked. I do have a plan, Nezu said. Yagi, in his normal form, can teach first-year heroics, while All Might teaches some of the upper classes. Aizawa grimaced. Which classes? Those students will be graduating soon, and they can't afford to have been taught poorly. That's why he will not be teaching alone. He can help run the practical exercises of some of the upper-year heroics courses. We'll schedule them against each other so he doesn't run out of time on any given day, Nezu said. Then he can be listed as a secondary teacher or a co-teacher on multiple courses. I can do that, Yagi said. A bit complicated though, 13 added. Yeah. I hate to say this, but Kayama seemed uncomfortable with her suggestion even as she spoke. Wouldn't it be easier to just reject his application? Yes, but we shouldn't, Aizawa said flatly. We can't just reject all the applicants with information gathering potential because we have secrets to keep. It might be better this way, Yagi said. It would probably be easier to learn how to teach if I'm under the guidance of others as a secondary instructor. Yeah. Plus, more students would get to meet All Might, Hound Dog said gruffly. That'd make them happy and it's good for PR. We just have to be careful that Midoriya and All Might never come in contact. Nezu wanted All Might to be moved to teaching the older students for his own reasons. Since All Might had chosen Mirio as his successor, it would be better for All Might to teach the third years so he could more easily have contact with Tagata. In a way, Nezu appreciated Midoriya giving him a proper excuse. Kayama nodded, and the teachers seemed to be in agreement over this plan, even though it would require a significant amount of very last-minute switching around. All right then, we have our plan, Nezu said, and so the meeting ended. The doorbell rang. I'll get it. Izuku called, running to answer it. His UA letter was supposed to be coming today. And sure enough, at the door was the postal worker, carrying all their mail for the day. And in that mail was Izuku's letter marked from UA. Time for the moment of truth. Izuku took the heavy envelope upstairs and opened it, just to find a hollow disc inside. He unwrapped and activated the disc. All Might appeared on the screen. I am here, as a projection, he said. All Might. How'd UA get him to do the acceptance letters? Now, you're probably wondering why you see me here. Which is why I come bearing an announcement. I actually came to Mizudafu to teach at UA. Projection, All Might said. All Might's teaching at UA? Part of Izuku was absolutely thrilled, but the other part was mortified. Would All Might still remember him? All Might hadn't known at the time that Izuku had figured out his real name and quirk, so it shouldn't be a problem, but just remembering that mistake was absolutely embarrassing. While I'll only be teaching the upper years, projection, All Might said, which made Izuku both disappointed and relieved, I'm here to deliver your scores. And perhaps I'll end up being your teacher in a year or two. Alright, I can work with that, Izuku thought. Now tell me if I got in or not. As for your physical exam score, you managed to achieve 26 villain points. Not bad, but unfortunately a little short of being enough to get you into the hero course. What? But my quirk's it? Izuku's roiling feelings of shock and betrayal were interrupted by All Might once more. If that's all there was to it, take a look at this video. A video in the background of the scene clicked on. On screen was that blue-haired boy, Ida Tenya, talking to present Mike. Apologies for the intrusion, sir, Ida said, doing a chopping motion with his arm. But you know that boy who was muttering in the auditorium? The one with the green hair? I am unsure of how many points he got, but I must ask you to admit him. Why do you say that, little listener? Present Mike could be heard asking off-screen. I ran away when that girl was in danger, Ida said. It was that boy who stepped up and told me I needed to save her. Even more so than me, he would make an excellent hero, Ida said, face set in determination. So I must recommend him very strongly for the hero course. The video within a projection was clicked off. That student there has a point, you know? All Might said. How could a hero course reject someone like you, who brings out the heroic spirit in others? He announced. For encouraging someone else's heroic actions, and thus contributing to a rescue, you've been awarded 25 rescue points. When combined with your villain points, that's definitely enough for you to get into the hero course. Izuku gasped in shock, a broad grin spreading across his face. And that's not all. For saving that person from the zero-pointer, Ida himself received 45 rescue points, which puts him in first place for the entire exam. All Might said. All three of you passed. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. I'm in. My Quirk wasn't lying. Your heroic spirit is truly something to be admired. Congrats on getting a 98% on the written exam, by the way. That marks something of a record. Top scorer this year. Nedzu informs me it's been a while since anyone scored that high. Oops, sheet. Might have overdone it. Well, this is fine. This just means that my INT and WIS are high enough now to believably class as an intelligence-boosting analysis quirk. That's what I was worried about in the first place. The rest of your enrollment information will arrive in the mail this week. Plus Ultra. With that, the recording ended. Izuku swung his door open. Mom, I got in. Midoriya Inko's eyes filled with happy tears. Oh, congratulations, sweetheart. Congratulations, Midoriya and Bakugu, on getting into UA High, the principal announced. To hear that two of you got into such a prestigious high school, especially you, Midoriya, after discovering your quirk so late. We'll be sure to congratulate both of you at our commencement ceremony. Bakugu glared daggers at him. Izuku winced. Well, time to avoid Kaken for as long as possible. There wasn't much time left before classes at UA would start. And Izuku was thrilled, though he knew it might be a bit tough for him, since he hadn't been able to boost his physical stats very much. Looking at it from an objective standpoint, I obviously put too many points into wisdom, Izuku thought to himself. It might have been better to split it, half WIS and half VIT or half WIS and half STR. But it isn't not like I could have known that that level of WIS would be overkill. I wasn't sure how much 45 stat points would really end up being at the time. With a little bit of extra thinking, Izuku made a plan for how he wanted to use his future unallotted stat points. Since UA involved a lot of physical conditioning, he would wait for his STR and DX to rise around as high as they would go with regular training. Then he would use his unallotted stat points to top off those two stats. He would try and make them go as high as he could without making it look like Izuku had an unregistered strength quirk. He'd do the same with the. When it got so high that practicing with observe and detect enemies wasn't improving it any longer, he'd add a few more stat points. He'd try not to worry about his INT and WS for now, seemed like they were high enough for now, and he didn't want to spend more stat points on them unnecessarily. And last of all, judging by how slow his VIT was leveling, he'd probably have to increase that using unallotted stat points alone. That meant, if he got more stat points in the future, he should save them for topping off his strength and dexterity later, or he should put them in VIT right off the bat, to get that stat up to par since VIT wasn't leveling any longer on its own. Izuku puffed out a confident breath. This was a good plan. Izuku, casually looking at his stats, absently decided to delete some people off his relationship page. For one, Bakuga's parents were cluttering it up when he didn't really know them, and for two, seeing his low relationship with his old classmates all the time had been getting him down. After removing Bakuga's parents and his old classmates, he looked at his relationship screen to see how it looked, expecting it to be depressingly thin. It sort of was, but... Relationships. Midoriya Inko, Rep plus unconditional love. Bakugu Katsuki, Rep, enemy. Type abusive. Ida Tenya, Rep plus admiration. Nedzu, Rep plus curious. The first thing Izuku noticed was that Ida's rep had gone from a little negative to way in the positive. That was great. And Ida actually admired him? 2 seconds later, Izuku noticed Nedzu was there. Why is Nedzu on my relationships list? Izuku thought, a little frantically. What had he done for the principal to take note of him? Nedzu had to have noticed him at the entrance exam for some reason. There was no other explanation that made sense. His reputation with Nedzu was positive, which was good, but the curious tag worried Izuku. Does he suspect my quirk is fake? Why would he be curious about me? I didn't think I was acting that strange. Maybe because I was the top scorer on the written? Why? Izuku muttered to himself, putting his head in his hands. Finally, it was the first day of school. Izuku was buzzing with excitement. Bakugo had been trying to corner him for the past 2 weeks, but Izuku had managed to give him the slip every time. It was half luck and half the fact that he could detect enemies to discern Bakugo's location. Izuku was pretty sure that Bakugo just wanted to talk. But he didn't want to have a talk with Bakugo because he was scary, so he would avoid him as long as it took. At this point he was just praying Kaken would be in 1B. Regardless of this weight on his mind, Izuku was still incredibly excited. His mom was thrilled about his first day too. She dragged him out of bed early, even though he could hardly sleep, and made breakfast while he got on his uniform. Luckily, his breakfast included green tea. Green tea. Minus 20x, plus 6 HP. Good for you. Which helped get rid of his exhaustion. Izuku was pretty sure that drinking tea couldn't actually undo the fact he didn't sleep, just give him a caffeine boost, but he sure felt like the tea had simply erased his exhaustion. Numerically speaking, if he drank enough green tea, his exhaustion would inevitably drop down to 0. Did these healing items operate outside of normalcy as well? Questions for later. For now, he had school. With backpack in hand and a full stomach, Izuku waved goodbye to his mother and marched his way to school. He was there in very little time, but the huge gates didn't help his nerves. As Izuku was walking to the classroom, he decided that he was hoping for Ida to be in his class. He worried about meeting Ida a little. Since he seemed super intense, Izuku also worried about messing up the apparent admiration Ida had in him, but he also seemed so earnest that Izuku couldn't help but want to be his friend. As Izuku walked in, he saw perhaps the worst-case scenario. Ida and Bakugo were both there, but they were arguing with each other. Take your feet off that desk now. It's the first day and you're already disrespecting the academy by scuffing school property, you cretin. Ida said. You're kidding me, right? Bakugo scoffed. Ida opened his mouth to retort but quickly stopped when he saw Izuku. He turned away from Bakugo and walked in his direction. You got in. I must apologize for what I said earlier. You saw the true nature of the exam, and you behaved much more heroically than I did in that situation. For that I must thank you. Oh, it was no big deal, Izuku said sheepishly. You're the one who saved her. Your humility is admirable. Ida said. But you don't give yourself enough credit. Oh, glasses kid and messy-haired kid, a voice said. The girl that Ida had saved earlier bounced into the classroom. It's you too. I'm so excited you guys got in. What are your names? I'm Uraraka. Uraraka said. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your stuff now. A voice from the floor. Izuku glanced down and saw a yellow caterpillar. No, a man in a yellow sleeping bag getting up from the ground. It took 8 seconds for you to shut up. That's not gonna work. Time is precious. Is this our teacher? Izuku resisted the urge to use observe on the man immediately. He'd wait for his moment. The man introduced himself as Aizawa Shoyuda and announced in short order that they would be doing some kind of quirk assessment test outside instead of going to orientation. It was a bit disappointing because he'd been planning to observe all the teachers to see what they were all about, but it seemed like he'd have to wait. Alert! Heroics Quest activation. Heroics Quest, the quirk assessment test. Goal, don't get last place. Bonus, get 15th place or above. Bonus 2, get 10th place or above. Rewards, plus 1 stat point, plus 200 XP. Bonus rewards, plus 5 stat points, plus 500 XP. Bonus 2 rewards, -5 rep with Bakugo Katsuki, +5 rep with Aizawa Shoyuta. Another quest. He'd definitely want to do well on this test, so he could get some stat points. And to be honest, he should try to get above 10th too. Honestly, what's losing another 5 rep points with Kaken? It's already at -50, better to build rep with my new teacher. But when Aizawa announced the nature of the test, Izuku couldn't help but wince. They were physical tests, which his fake quirk wouldn't help him with whatsoever. While his STR and DX were pretty good compared to the average citizen, Izuku suspected he would be no match for the people who actually had quirks capable of boosting their scores. Getting above 10th might be impossible. But, well, when Izuku thought about it, it didn't really matter that much if he lost. He could lose and it'd be fine. Yes, there were some stat points in the game, but he couldn't expect to win every quest. And it was just a test anyways. It's going to be fine, Izuku thought. Then, once they were outside, Aizawa threatened to expel them. If I see any students not taking this seriously, I'll expel them immediately, Aizawa reprimanded. It made Izuku feel a little skittish. Does he mean that? Expelled on the first day? A pink-skinned girl exclaimed. A red-haired boy agreed with her. Isn't that a little harsh? Life is harsh, Aizawa said. Get used to it. We're wasting time by just standing here, so let's get started. Despite Izuku's best efforts, he didn't do exactly well on the test. Since most of the tests were based on dexterity, which he was better at than strength, and his decent flexibility, his score was alright for a normal person. And he definitely tried his very hardest. But when almost everyone had quirks that could help them out on the test, Izuku scanned the scoreboard for his name. He found it by the end of the list. Number 16, Midoriya Izuku. Izuku gave a sigh that was somewhere between relief and disappointment. Alert! Heroics quest has been completed. Collect rewards? Alert! Heroics bonus quest failed. Alert! Heroics bonus quest 2 failed. Looks like I'm just not quite good enough to get 15th or above yet, so close, though. Mineta Minoru, Aizawa said, staring at the kid who had gotten last place. Huh? The kid said, looking nervous. You were slacking. Don't think I missed the fact you were goofing off with Kaminari earlier. Do better next time or you won't be here much longer. Got it, sensei. Mineta said nervously, gulping. Peh, might as well expel him already, Bakugo scoffed. He got an even lower score than Deku and his useless quirk. Bakugo glared at Izuku, letting everyone in the class know exactly who he meant by Deku. Bakugo, Aizawa said. I'm pretty sure I just said that I was willing to expel students who didn't behave. Did I not make myself clear? Bakugo looked away, clearly trying to contain his anger. Keep it in mind, Aizawa said before turning back to the class. Did he just threaten to expel Kaken? Izuku bit his lip. It felt like a good sign, the idea that this teacher wouldn't let Bakugo get away with things, but Izuku knew that it probably wasn't. Strict teachers, even though they claimed to be fair, always ended up being soft on their favorites. And then they usually came down hard on the heads of the kids who they liked the least. Bakugo, diligent student, perfect quirk, was getting expulsion threats just for mouthing off. Then what kind of consequences would someone like Izuku face for his mistakes? Best to keep his head down in this class and try to avoid being noticed. And Midoriya, Aizawa said. See me after class. Never mind, Izuku thought, barely resisting the urge to sigh as his classmates sent him curious glances. The class headed back inside to change out of their gym uniforms. Collect rewards, Izuku said as he went. The quirk assessment test complete. Rewards hidden, +1 stat points, +100 XP. New stat points. Not many but still. As per his new plan, he'd save the point for later. Izuku awkwardly stayed behind in the classroom, feeling oddly vulnerable staring into the tired, flat expression of his new homeroom teacher. The principal wants to have a meeting with you tomorrow in order to rework your schedule, Aizawa finished. Izuku froze, remembering Nedzu's +5, curious on his relationship screen. But what's wrong with my schedule? Your entrance exam score indicates that you're far past the usual high school science and mathematics curriculum. Going at the pace of your classmates at this point would be illogical and a waste of your time. Oh, Izuku said. He hadn't really thought of that. That makes sense, I guess. You'll meet with Nedzu tomorrow to build a new schedule. In the subjects in which you're ahead, you'll likely be placed in advanced second and third year classes for now, but Nedzu suspects by the end of the year that you'll improve enough to need either private tutoring or university courses, Aizawa said. His tone was dry but casual, and Izuku couldn't tell if it was deceptively so. Private tutoring? Is this some kind of test? Sorry, Izuku said. I don't mean to impose. Aizawa gave Izuku an unimpressed look. Don't apologize for your academic success. And here's your pass for tomorrow. Aizawa handed him a hall pass marked for a time in the morning. Thank you, Izuku said, giving a hesitant wave. Aizawa gave a simple nod in response. As Izuku left the room, he glanced back at Aizawa, who was sitting back down at his desk. As quietly as he could, he whispered, Detect. Enemies. Observe. No enemies detected nearby. Aizawa Shoyuda LVL, 54 Watchful Guardian. Quirk, Erasure. See stats and skills. Izuku considered this result as he walked out of the room. He's not at enemy status, not that I think he'd be, Izuku thought, feeling a little ridiculous at the thought. I mean, I might not have the best history with teachers, but it would be stupid to think that this one would just randomly be an enemy of mine. But deep down, Izuku knew he'd chosen to use detect enemies for a reason, because he didn't trust that that wouldn't be the case. And maybe it was a worthwhile precaution. He remembered what happened the last time he'd gotten a new enemy, after all. But putting that aside, going off Aizawa's quirk name, Erasure, and his scarf, Izuku strongly suspected that Aizawa was secretly the Erasure hero, Eraserhead. Eraserhead kept a low profile, but he was a very skilled underground hero, and seemed like just the type that UA would hire. His title is interesting too. Watchful Guardian is probably a play. He's technically the temporary guardian of his students because he's their teacher, but he also protects people as a hero. That's kinda cool. But the watchful part is a bit worrying, since I have the secret of my quirk. But I'm not sure titles really give very good hints as to the nature of how someone is. I mean, my title is Broken Chemist, but I'm not a chemist. And my quirk doctor had that Shadow of the Demon title even though he's just an old man. But Aizawa does seem like a watchful sort of guy. It was something to ponder. Izuku walked away from the school, getting back on the train. At the very least it had been an interesting first day. Izuku sat in his bed, waiting anxiously. He'd woken up at 3 a.m. in the morning and hadn't been able to go back to sleep, too keyed up at the idea of having his first normal day of classes, well, maybe normal, depending on how the meeting went, and his upcoming meeting with the principal. Since he was awake, he decided to creep around before breakfast and look around the house for better healing items. Only food and drink responded to observe, just like he'd thought, but finding anything that resembled a healing item was difficult. While a lot of them had health benefits, most of them were proportional to size. The best he found was a large salad that would net him plus 15 HP, but he wouldn't have time to consume a giant salad in the middle of a fight. That meant his best bet was still green tea until he managed to find better healing items. He did find something else that was useful in the cabinets, though. Chocolate-covered coffee beans. -6x caffeine and sugar, the perfect combo. No health benefits, but it was -6 exhaustion per bean, which was pretty good. If his exhaustion was too high, he could just shove a bunch of them in his mouth and swallow them quickly. Hopefully they'd give him an energy boost. He put the chocolate-covered coffee beans in his bag, just in. At that point, his mom came out from her bedroom and started to make breakfast, which meant he had to end his healing item hunt. He'd work more at it later. His hall pass was marked for the second class of the day, which was English. So that meant that after homeroom, he was to immediately go meet with Nedzu. Present Mike gave him an encouraging smile when Izuku showed him his hall pass, and told him he could leave for his meeting. My first meeting with the principal at this school, let's get this over with. Nedzu had taken the liberty of doing a quick look over of Midoriya's school files to get a better idea for how to tackle the boys' scheduling situation. And what he found was interesting. According to these records, Midoriya hadn't been in any advanced classes during his time at Aldera, meaning that everything he'd learned to score well on the exam had been either self-taught or the result of tutoring outside of school. Also interestingly, most of the comments left by teachers indicated that Midoriya was disruptive in class, disrespectful towards authority figures, and abrasive with his peers. Frankly, Nezu wasn't all that surprised. Midoriya had probably been very bored, and teenagers were famous for their poor impulse control. Keeping him stuck in a classroom with literally nothing to do had probably not been a good idea. What could he expect from Midoriya? Midoriya might show up to UA with behavioral problems, like antipathy and hostility, as suggested was his normal at Aldera, but Nezu suspected that the problem might die down to some degree once Midoriya's educational needs were met. Not only that, but Nezu couldn't rule out the possibility that Midoriya might be cocky or arrogant, having grown an ego from being surrounded by people who couldn't keep up. Nezu didn't see even a hint that either of those things were true when he actually met Midoriya. When Midoriya arrived for his meeting, he was stiff as a board and white as a sheet, looking like he very much didn't want to be there. Despite the fact that it wasn't completely unusual for people to show up to his office being a little nervous, Nezu couldn't help but feel mildly concerned. Nezu greeted him politely, resisting the urge to frown. Midoriya, achingly shy, said only hello back. Nezu was pretty sure he could see Midoriya trembling slightly. This was a far cry from the rebellious teen found in the files. Had someone been telling him horror stories about Nezu? Maybe the kid was just nervous because it was the second day? For a reason Nezu couldn't explain, those explanations didn't feel right. So I assume that Aizawa told you why you were coming? Nezu said. Why yeah, Izuku said. We have to change my schedule? Exactly, Nezu said. Why don't you take a seat? We can talk over your scheduling adjustments. Midoriya took a careful seat across from Nezu. Izuku left Nezu's meeting with a relieved sigh. I'm glad that's over, he thought to himself. Not that it had been unpleasant. No, on the contrary, Principal Nezu had been very nice. He didn't talk over Izuku, he didn't yell at Izuku for his twitchy posture or his averted gaze, and he hadn't made Izuku feel bad about himself. He hadn't even reprimanded Izuku for his mumbling. No, Principal Nezu seemed rather kind. At the very least, he was the type to keep up appearances. Still, being in there, he couldn't help but think about what had happened with his old principal and the situation with Nakano. Then that made him remember how he'd been trapped in the closet, choking on noxious gas, frantically searching for anything to help him remove the hinge pins. The whole thing made him want to crawl out of his skin. But once he'd left the office and the haze of panic had lifted, the whole meeting had been harmless in retrospect. Just some scheduling changes. Nezu had even asked his opinions. Izuku appreciated that even if he was a bit nervous to actually say what he thought. Izuku would take third-year classes in math and science, and he'd add a second-year computer science class to replace English, since he was mostly fluent at this point. He'd keep the rest of his classes the same, those being Japanese literature, heroics, and modern hero art history. So that was 3 classes to be changed, and 3 normal classes. Izuku liked it, he thought it was a pretty good split. He'd get some extra English material from Yamada-sensei to make sure he stayed ahead in that area. Izuku was quite sure he'd be able to handle the workload with the INT and WIS stat boosts he'd given himself before the UA entrance exam. He'd also managed to cleverly get Nezu's stat block during the meeting by sliding the word observations into their conversation, which Izuku felt inordinately gleeful about. Nezu LVL, 63 UA principal. Quirk, high specs. See stats and skills. He hadn't been able to use detect enemies, but Izuku could just check Nezu's status from the relationship screen. All in all, Izuku was pretty satisfied with what had gone on in the meeting, even if the whole thing had been a bit much while it was in progress. He returned to class just as modern hero art history was starting. Uraraka had invited him to sit with her and Ito once lunch came around, and Izuku was incredibly happy about it, if slightly nervous. The 3 of them talked for a little bit about mundane things, like the weather and how our class is going and do you have any siblings? Uraraka was cheerful and friendly, and Ito revealed he really was related to Ingenium just like Izuku had thought. Turns out Ingenium was his older brother. Oh, I hope this isn't rude to ask Midoriya, but since you're in the hero course with us, Uraraka asked. What's your quirk? Izuku panicked and fumbled for a brief moment before managing to say, analysis. I can tell what someone's name and quirk is by looking at them. That's so cool, Midoriya-kun, Uraraka had said, and that was the end. But Izuku felt like he'd been given a great gift, normalcy. When Izuku got to the last class of the day, heroics, he was thrilled. This was going to be the most important class considering the career he was going into. He wondered who would teach the class. Just as the class was about to begin, an older man, looking thin and sickly, entered the room. Hello, he said, looking a tad nervous. My name is Yagi Tashinori, and I'll be your instructor for heroics this year. There was a slight murmuring among the class, probably the other students trying to figure out what hero this guy was, since basically all of UA's staff were heroes. He's probably a retired hero, he heard Jiru say. Yeah, he does look older, Siro murmured back. But Izuku had a much more pressing concern. Did he say his name was Yagi Tashinori? But that was... Observe, Izuku muttered under his breath. Yagi Tashinori LVL. 99 the symbol of peace. Quirk, 1 for all, remnants. See stats and skills. What? Those were the stats and skills he'd seen on All Might. How was that possible? A feeling of dread came over Izuku. His first instinct was to quickly leave the classroom and run to fetch Nedzu or Aizawa. After all, this man couldn't be All Might, right? Maybe he was a shapeshifter? His quirk was 1 for all, and if he was one who could become all via shapeshifting, that sort of made sense. But no. That theory fell to pieces the more he thought about it. It brought up too many questions. If Yagi was just some guy, then why was he at LVL 99? Why was his title symbol of peace? It really seemed like Yagi is All Might. But how is that possible? Could it be that All Might's quirk is a transformation type and that's why he has 2 forms? Izuku stared at Yagi. That would mean, I'm being taught by All Might? Izuku gaped at the idea. But still, while his theory explained a lot, there were still things that went unexplained. Once he'd seen All Might's time limit 10 months ago, he'd started looking up the hours the hero spent on work and found a strange pattern. All Might, after a fight 5 years ago, had vanished from the media and then sharply decreased his hours. Nowadays, he only spent around 3 hours a day on hero work. So, why had All Might suddenly incurred a time limit on his transformation quirk? Had he gotten hurt, or something? Or was it just aging? Had he always had a time limit? Was Izuku wrong? Was this man an imposter after all? Whatever the case, he planned to find out. Almost as soon as Yagi entered, he felt a pair of oddly intense eyes on him. He glanced over and saw Midoriya. Midoriya was staring him down, seemingly deep in thought. That's the kid who can figure someone's name and quirk by looking at them, right? Yagi thought to himself. He's probably doing that right now. He'll only find Yagi Tashinori, though, and he shouldn't know the meaning behind the words 1 for all, if it even shows up as that instead of quirkless, given I've handed it off to Mirio. Speaking of, the kid looked kind of familiar, but Yagi couldn't place him. And the kid had a plain-looking sort of face, so maybe he was thinking of someone else? Regardless, Yagi felt mildly unsettled. He tried his best to ignore it. He explained to the students they'd be changing into their costumes and heading to Battleground B to start off their first-year heroics class. The class broke into excited chatter as they got out of their seats and went to change. As excited as Izuku was to investigate, he had to do this first. This was his first heroics class after all. And he got to do it in the costume his mom made him. He should really try to pay attention and avoid thinking about the whole Yagi thing. It didn't work that great. Izuku still felt kind of distracted. Yagi announced they'd be splitting into random groups of 2. Their team would be assigned heroes or villains, and they would have to either attempt to get to or protect a fake bomb that was held by the villains. Izuku was very happy when he was paired with Uraraka. Alert! Heroics Quest activation. Heroics Quest, first training exercise. Rewards, plus 6 stat points, plus 300 XP. Another chance to earn stat points. These quest opportunities were rolling in faster than ever. Now I really can't get distracted, Izuku thought. I need to get those 6 stat points, which means putting the whole Yagi thing out of my mind. Focus on your strategy for now. So he was paired with Uraraka, but who would he be fighting? Team A will be fighting Team D, Yagi announced. Izuku glanced over at Team D. Bakugo snarled at him, while Ida gave a friendly but competitive grin. Oh joy, guess this won't be easy. Any plan on how to win this, Uraraka? Izuku asked, turning to her. I'm not sure, she said. Bakugo has explosion, Ida has engine, Izuku said to himself, deep in thought. You know, I think I have an idea. Uraraka removed Izuku's gravity. Izuku slowly rose and grabbed the side of the roof and pulled himself forward, so he hovered over the roof. Once Uraraka saw that he was safely bobbing and wouldn't fall multiple stories, she dropped him. Izuku made an oomph noise as he hit the concrete of the top of the building. He stuck out his hand in a thumbs-up gesture, signaling to Uraraka that she could go in the front entrance. Izuku, meanwhile, snuck down the staircase that went from the roof to the 5th floor. Even though it would be more strategically sound to send Ida after me, since he's faster, I just know that Bakugo is going to try and go hunt for me himself. Your observation of others increases your people skills. +1 cha. Thank you, Quirk. Anyway, since I know he's going to try to go get me, that means Ida is going to guard the bomb. They probably set the bomb on one of the higher levels, so Kaken would probably go down to look for me. That means Bakugo would encounter Uraraka, and Izuku would encounter Ida. Izuku did feel a little bit bad about setting up Uraraka to fight Bakugo, but she was a better counter to him than Izuku. If Uraraka managed to touch him, therefore making him weightless, Bakugo setting off any explosion would make him fly off in some other direction, thus making her an excellent Bakugo counter. By contrast, Izuku had nothing that could beat Kaken. Also, Izuku didn't want to get maimed. Bakugo still seemed kinda mad about how Izuku got into UA and then didn't tell him and then avoided him for 2 weeks, so... But regardless, Izuku was certain that their best way to win was for Izuku to try to get past Ida somehow. Izuku crept down the staircase, quiet as a mouse. Floors 5 and 4 were a bust, but the 3rd floor... Do I hear Ida's voice? Before Izuku could approach it, he heard crackling static in his comm. I found Bakugo, Uraraka said. Where's the demon nerd? Bakugo's shouting was loud enough for Izuku to hear it through the comm. See if you can keep him busy, Izuku whispered. I think I found Ida. Roger, Uraraka said. An explosion sounded in the background. Izuku ignored the sounds of battle coming from his earpiece and crept towards where he'd heard Ida's voice. Of evil, to become a hero. Behold, I am the personification of villainy, Ida said. He finished the sentence with an evil laugh. Is he role-playing? Izuku thought to himself. He barely repressed a snort. Ida really is an earnest sort of guy. He's really putting his all into this. Midoriya, Bakugo is coming your way, Uraraka said. He backtracked when he saw you weren't with me and I wasn't able to stop him. I'm following him up. That was bad. If Bakugo showed up at Izuku's location fast enough, he'd be sandwiched between Ida on one side and Bakugo on the other, which would be a disaster. That meant he had to move now. Izuku rushed forward through the door as quickly as he could. Ida jumped in surprise at his appearance, not having heard him coming, and ran toward him at super speed. At just the right moment, Izuku kicked down at Ida's leg, causing him to stumble. Ida managed to right himself before his engine sent him reeling, and he managed to regain his momentum and shove Izuku into the wall. Izuku struggled but couldn't get out of Ida's grip. I'm pinned, Izuku thought, unable to escape. Ida fumbled with one of the pockets of the costume to get what was probably the HNDCFFS. An explosion sounded behind the two. Deku, Bakugo said. I have Midoriya pinned. Ida said, still fumbling for the cuffs. You should search for Uraraka. Deku's mine. Hand him over and find her yourself. Bakugo growled. Bakugo, that would be quite inefficient. Shut up, glasses. Nobody cares. Izuku, glancing behind the two, saw Uraraka at the entrance. Neither of them seemed to notice her presence, Too busy arguing. He gestured to the bomb with his free hand, giving her a little nod. Uraraka nodded back in determination and started sneaking over to the bomb. Still, there's not much cover in this room. There's a good chance they'll notice, unless I can keep their attention away from her. Which meant it was time to make a distraction. Hey Kaken, Izuku said. You're the dumbest person I've ever met. What? Bakugu's hands sparked as he whipped his head around, giving Izuku a murderous, outraged look. Midoriya-Ida started, but Izuku disregarded his warning. How does it feel to be in the same school as me? Someone whose quirk is so weak they didn't even realize it existed for 10 years? Is it because I've gotten stronger, Kaken? Bakugo gave a scream of rage and ran toward the two, shoving Ida off Izuku and cornering Izuku himself. Or maybe it's because you've gotten weak, Izuku taunted. Bakugo hit one of his hands into Izuku's shoulders. It crackled and he set off a direct explosion. Sharp burning pain slammed into Izuku's shoulder. Alert! Damage taken. Type, fire, -26 HP. Izuku gritted his teeth and muffled a yell. Don't you ever call me weak! Bakugo shouted. He grabbed Izuku and tossed him to the ground. You've always been beneath me. You've never been at my level. Standing over Izuku, Bakugo lifted another hand and trained it in his direction. Izuku quickly brought up his hands to shield his face, just in case Bakugo tried to send another explosion his way. Izuku cringed, unsure if he could beat Bakugo at this point even if he tried. Bakugo, I think that's enough, Ida protested. He's already lost. He hasn't, Bakugo said, but he was interrupted. That's it, everyone. Uraraka has captured the bomb. Heroes win. Yagi's voice rang over the intercom, announcing their victory. Alert! Heroic's quest has been completed. Collect rewards? Bakugo and Ida quickly swung their heads around to look at the other side of the room, but it was too late. Uraraka had one hand on the bomb, and the game was over. Bakugo glared down at Izuku, eyes all right with rage. But instead of trying to explode him again, like Izuku expected he would, Bakugo simply lowered his arm, ever so slowly, mouth splitting into a feral grin. Ha! So that really is all you're good for, isn't it, Deku? Just dirty tricks. Well, guess what? You're nothing compared to me. Bakugo shouted. And you never have been. Bakugo turned around and stormed off, stomping out of the room with a purpose. That's no way to talk to a classmate. Ida shouted after him. He scowled slightly when there was no response. How rude. Izuku had long gotten used to Bakugo's insults. But something was off about Bakugo. Izuku had expected Bakugo to kill him for saying something like that, or try to injure him as badly as was allowed within the confines of the exercise, but it seemed like Bakugo had been holding back. Is he still off his game because of that time I almost died? I feel like it's been long enough for him to get over it, but maybe he's still worried about severely hurting me. I suppose it would be pretty disturbing to hear about an accident like that. Uraraka, who had been standing by the bomb, ran over to Ida and Izuku. Are you okay, Midoriya? I saw you got hit. I'm fine, Izuku said, wincing as he hauled himself to his feet. Just singed. Let's get you to Recovery Girl, then. Uraraka insisted. She and Ida helped him off the battlefield. Now who was the MVP for this fight? Yagi asked. Ida and Uraraka, along with Bakugo, had returned to hear the debriefing, but Midoriya was still stuck with Recovery Girl. From what Yagi had seen, his injuries hadn't been too severe, though he had to admit he was still a little concerned. He knew Recovery Girl would take care of it, though. Midoriya and Uraraka, I believe, tied for first. Yaoyorozu answered. Midoriya's plan was instrumental to their success, and though he got himself captured, he also created a vital distraction. Uraraka, in addition, carried out her part of the plan perfectly and was the one who managed to sneak to the bomb. They were the perfect team. Excellent explanation, Yaoyorozu. Yagi said, but Yaoyorozu wasn't done. Ida took the exercise seriously and did well during the beginning, but he let himself get drawn into an argument with Bakugo, Yaoyorozu said. I will try to do better in the future. Ida promised. Yaoyorozu's eyes slid towards Bakugo, who scoffed and looked away from her. Bakugo, on the other hand, was basically the reason their group lost. He lost sight of the objective, failed to work with his teammate, and actively hindered Ida's efforts. That's why neither Ida or Bakugo should be MVP. Bakugo scowled and said nothing. Recovery Girl healed him quickly. One kiss and just like that he was fixed. He felt a bit tired, though, since her quirk drained his stamina, but she gave him some gummies to compensate for that. As he was walking out of school with his gummies, he glanced down at them. "Observe," Izuku said. "Stamina regeneration gummies. Minus 20x designed to be helpful." Izuku gaped. Minus 20 exhaustion per gummy? Hell yeah, now this was a healing item. He ate his gummies and then after decided to eat a handful of chocolate-covered coffee beans. They were bitter, but it made him feel even less exhausted. Soon enough he wasn't feeling tired at all. "I wonder if Recovery Girl would let me borrow some of her gummies," Izuku thought to himself absently. Probably not, but worth asking. Oh, and one more thing. Collect rewards. First training exercise complete. Rewards, plus 6 stat points, plus 300 XP. Alert. Level up. You are now LVL 17. Izuku gave a sigh of contentment. More stat points, more leveling. As it was meant to be. Now that school was over, Izuku scribbled ideas into his notebook, excited and a little bit desperate to figure out the mystery behind who Yagi really was. Clues about Yagi-san? "I met All Might 10 months ago, and he had Yagi's stats. All Might only operates for 3 hours a day. He didn't always. All Might vanished from media for a week, then began sharply decreasing. Hours, 5 years ago. Yagi has a time limit on his quirk. Yagi can change his appearance, has been seen as his normal self and as All Might. Teacher form Yagi is definitely his true form. Quirked form, buff was not seen as an addendum when he's Yagi. Quirked form gave Yagi a buff to SU, X, and VIT. Yagi observe information, 1 for all, LVL, 99, symbol of peace. Both Yagi and All Might work at UA. Izuku bit the tip of his pen. From these clues, he could make a few concrete deductions. Firstly, since All Might's employment had been publicly announced, it didn't make sense that Yagi had been hired as All Might in disguise. Otherwise, the real All Might would have probably said something about how he wasn't working at UA. That meant All Might probably did work at UA, unless something was stopping him from talking about it. Secondly, he had to recall that he saw Yagi as All Might 10 months ago. Whatever this was hadn't started recently. Plus, that fight 5 years ago might be significant. Thirdly, according to his quirk, the ability Quirked Form gave Yagi strength buffs, which meant that if Yagi did have a shape-shifting quirk, it was one that allowed him to copy All Might's quirk, which was a rare and powerful ability. So knowing all these things, and having his information, Izuku had a couple theories. Yagi is the All Might working at the school, but both Yagi and All Might know this and that Yagi has replaced him. In this theory, for some reason, All Might had to stop doing hero work 5 years ago, and Yagi took his place. Ever since then, Yagi has been All Might, but All Might has been forced to decrease his hours due to Yagi's shape-shifting time limit. All Might's quirk is, in actuality, a transformation quirk. Yagi Tashinori is actually All Might's secret civilian identity. After the incident 5 years ago, All Might died or went MIA. The villainous Yagi took his place without people noticing, or he killed the people who noticed, and has been operating as All Might in secret ever since. Izuku was pretty sure that Theory 2 was still the most likely. It explained everything. The fact that Yagi was listed as Symbol of Peace by title, why Yagi looked just like All Might. They had the same hair, if you were looking for it. Besides, it was also statistically more likely, given how rare it was for a quirk to be able to copy both someone's appearance and quirk at the same time. So Theory 2 was the most likely. Yagi was probably All Might. But, even so, the simple possibility of Theory 3 was very scary. It was unlikely, but if something like that had taken place, it was very serious. On that point, it would probably only be responsible for Izuku to make sure he was correct and that an imposter hadn't infiltrated UA, but the only way to confirm that UA knew about what was going on was to ask them. Asking them, "I really ought to do it?" Besides, a few questions couldn't hurt, right? But who would he ask? Izuku sighed and put his notebook down. He didn't want to look stupid in front of Nezu if he was wrong, so he'd just ask Aizawa-sensei since he had immediate access to the guy. And Aizawa-sensei could erase the imposter's quirk if it turns out Theory 3 was in fact the case. I might have time to ask him before school if I show up early enough. Izuku thought to himself, grimacing. Well, guess that's what I'll be doing tomorrow. Izuku entered the classroom early and noticed that as he'd hoped, he was the only one there. He'd been a bit worried that Ito would be there too, because he had arrived early the previous 2 days, but he suspected that Ida had gotten caught up with the storm of media people that had been blocking the gates. Midoriya, Aizawa said. Speak to me for a moment? Izuku tried not to wince. He already has something he wants to talk to me about? Izuku reluctantly shuffled over to where Aizawa was standing and looked up to him expectantly. Ida told me yesterday that Bakugo has been giving you a hard time about your quirk, Aizawa said, giving Izuku a calculated gaze. It's fine, Izuku said. Nothing important. Minimize. Don't make yourself a problem. I did hear what he said on the first day, Aizawa said. If this is a recurring issue, I need to know. I don't tolerate quirk discrimination in my classroom. Shoot, how do I respond to this? I don't think it counts as that, Izuku said, swallowing a nervous laugh. He just doesn't like me very much. He makes fun of my quirk, yeah, but more because he hates me than anything else. Izuku said. Aizawa's flat expression didn't change. Still, I expect much better from my students. I'll speak with him. Let me know if he does this again. If he doesn't shape up, he's not fit for the hero course. Izuku gave a quick nod. Oh wow, he seems really serious about this. He really is strict. Izuku felt a brief flash of worry about how strict this teacher might be if he'd threatened to punish Bakugo twice, before he came up with a different answer to why he might have done those things. Both times he threatened to punish Bakugo were times he was trying to make fun of my new quirk. Eraserhead went to UA, right? I heard he had to transfer over from Gen Ed since he didn't do well in the entrance exam. I wouldn't be surprised if people tried to bully him for his quirk after he joined their class as a transfer under those conditions. Could it be that he's just looking out for me? Izuku thought that was possible, and the idea immediately eased his worries. He still had to be careful, he could still mess this up, but this meant that for once, a teacher was explicitly on his side. Seeing Izuku's silent reaction, Aizawa seemed to think their conversation was over. But unfortunately, Izuku still had to ask him about Yagi. Oh, could I ask? Izuku tried to muster up the courage. I really need to do this so that if Yagi's an evil imposter we don't all die. Come on Izuku, you can do it. Just wanted to check. Yagi, he's All Might, right? Aizawa paused. Why do you say that? Izuku ducked his head. He just has the same name and quirk. You met All Might at one point? Aizawa questioned, frowning. Yeah? Izuku shrugged. Like a year ago. Aizawa gave a long sigh and put his head in his hands. I'm gonna have to make a call. Stay put, give me a moment. Izuku awkwardly stood in place, fidgeting as Aizawa dialed someone on his phone. Aizawa opened the call with another sigh. Nezu. Midoriya's already met All Might. Now he's asking me about it. What should I say? There was a long pause. Tell him everything? You sure? Yeah. See you in a minute. Aizawa tucked his phone back into his pocket. Yes, you're right. Yagi is All Might. Oh. Izuku said. But I was a bit worried he might be an imposter or something. Secretly evil, taking All Might's place or something. Thankfully that's not true, Aizawa said. Regardless, I suspect you understand that you can't tell anyone about this. Izuku nodded quickly. I promise. I'm really sorry, I was just worried and wanted to make sure. It was a stupid idea, Izuku said, giving him a nervous glance. Aizawa shook his head. If you thought he might be an imposter, telling me was the right thing to do. We should have considered the possibility that you saw All Might in the past, considering he's been operating in Mizudafu for a while now. Izuku gave a reluctant nod. I'll smooth things over with Nezu and All Might, Aizawa said. They won't be angry though. There wasn't anything you could have done. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said, still feeling unconfident. Maybe this was a bad idea after all? Don't worry about it, Aizawa said. Aizawa swept out of the classroom just as the rest of his classmates began to enter. Izuku sat in the classroom, a bit awkwardly, and started to work on homework. Uraraka said hi to him cheerfully, and Ida gave him a compliment for being early and for his diligence in working on his homework, but besides that, he was mostly left alone. And he was worried. I'm glad All Might's not an imposter at least, or that at least you knew what was going on, but I've drawn unnecessary attention to myself. Did I just put myself in danger? Izuku bit his lip in worry. He had just discovered a major state secret. What if they got angry with him, or reported him to the government or something? Add Aizawa Shoyuta to relationships, Izuku said, relationships. Relationships. Midoriya Inko, rep plus unconditional love. Aizawa Shoyuta, rep plus neutral. Bakogu Katsuki, rep, enemy. Type abusive. Ida Tenya, rep plus admiration. Nedzu, rep plus concern. Uraraka Ochako, plus friendly. Well, sort of interesting. Aizawa's rep was minimally positive, which was fine enough for a teacher. Meanwhile, it looked like Uraraka's rep had gotten high enough for her to be added to the list automatically, with a friendly tag attached. Ida's rep had gone up a little. So had Nedzu's rep actually, but concern? Izuku was a bit worried about that. Was it concern for him, or concern about him? Well, at least his rep with Nedzu was still in the positive direction. No one had the enemy status, which meant no one actively was looking to hurt him. He supposed that's what counted. Even so, he'd have to apologize to Nedzu about this whole situation. Hopefully that would quell any anger Nedzu felt at him for his mistake. Aizawa came back a few minutes later, just as the bell rang, but unlike the 2 previous days, he looked frazzled rather than tired. Class, you'll be having a special hero informatics class today, Aizawa said, clearly not in the mood for mincing words. You need to elect a class representative. The class went wild, clearly excited. Ooh, pick me! Ashido shouted, raising her hand. Kero, it might be best, Azui started. To pick me? Ashido interrupted. If we're talking about it, I think I'd be a good class rep, Uraraka added. Aizawa grumbled and sat down at his desk. Just pick someone by the end of the hour. He turned his attention to his computer, leaving the class to their own devices. I think it would only be fair to decide by vote, Ida announced, catching everyone's attention. This ought to be a democratic process. Wouldn't we all vote for ourselves? Kaminari pointed out. Yeah, and we've only known each other for a few days, Kero, Azui said. That just means whoever actually receives votes truly deserves them. Ida insisted. I mean, I guess it could work, Kaminari remarked. I sort of like it. It is fair, Yaoyorozu said. Okay then, let's do it. Kirishima said. The class seemed to be in general agreement with him. Izuku ended up voting for himself. Even though he was pretty sure he wouldn't win, it wouldn't hurt to try. Being class representative would be a good networking opportunity, after all. After everyone had cast their votes and they were tallied, Izuku was a little stunned by the result. Midoriya, 3, Yaoyorozu, 2, Bakugo, I, Azui, I. Bakugo scoffed. Deku? Who the hell voted for him? Izuku couldn't help but agree. He was surprised as well. Izuku didn't miss the way Uraraka leaned back in her seat and gave an awkward grin, as if trying to play innocent. He also didn't miss the fact that both she and Ida had 0 votes, meaning that neither of them voted for themselves. I bet it was those 2, Izuku thought. That means that Midoriya is now the class rep, while Yaoyorozu is the vice representative, Ida said. Congratulations. Wow, I guess I'm just being thrown bodily into this leadership role, Izuku thought to himself as his classmates turned to look at him and congratulate him. I don't think I'll do very well, but too late now. You finished just in time, Aizawa said, a bit dryly. English class is about to start. Midoriya, it's room 240 for you. Where's he going? Kaminari called, boldly. Yeah, why does he get to leave? Ashido asked. Aizawa flashed his eyes. The class shut up quickly. Midoriya is in some different classes than you, Aizawa said. He can tell you why if he wants, but don't bother him about it. Midoriya. Izuku scrambled out of his seat and grabbed his backpack on the way over to the door. He followed Aizawa out of the room just as Present Mike popped into the classroom, shouting excitedly about how it was time for English. In English, Izuku started walking away from Aizawa, towards the staircase. And Midoriya, Aizawa said. Izuku froze. See Nedzu at lunch, Aizawa said. Izuku grimaced. His new computer programming class was interesting. He got a few curious glances, for not being a second year, as he went into the classroom, but the teacher hadn't really paid him any attention as he took an empty seat in the back. During their class PRD, they basically had just gone over the syllabus, and Izuku hadn't had much of an opportunity to talk with anyone. It seemed like the class would have lots of its grade based on projects, though, which Izuku was a little excited for. Hopefully not group projects, though. Third-year math was different. They jumped straight into the subject matter, no time spent on the syllabus, and Izuku spent the whole class taking notes. It was oddly satisfying. With his high INT, Izuku had no problem learning the material. He just sat and absorbed everything the teacher said, which was kind of fun. By the end, he actually found himself wanting more time in math class, a foreign feeling to him considering school was normally supposed to be boring. It was interesting. And the kid who sat next to him, a tall blonde boy named Tagada, had introduced himself cheerfully, saying that he hoped they could be friends. Izuku knew to be wary of the upperclassmen, but the guy seemed earnest like Ida and friendly like Uraraka, which made him hopeful. Maybe they could at least have a cordial school friends type relationship? His looming meeting with the principal distracted him from most of his other subjects, though. The half-day seemed to pass by in a rush, and soon enough Izuku was seated in the same chair he'd been in yesterday, giving an awkward, nervous smile. Ah, welcome Midoriya, Nedzu said pleasantly. I am so sorry, Izuku rushed to say. I didn't know. No harm done, Nedzu said, taking the situation calmly. And it's true there's nothing you could have done to prevent the situation. Yagi! The door of the office creaked open, revealing Yagi, All Might, behind it. Have a seat, Nedzu said. Feel free to introduce yourself. Yagi Tashinori, and it's nice to meet you, Yagi said. So you're the one who figured out my identity? Not on purpose. Izuku emphasized. At least there's that, Yagi said, sighing. Nedzu said you were responsible, just be careful, young man. If it gets out you know who I am, you could be targeted by villains. I mean, I didn't tell anyone for the last 10 months when I knew your identity, that's when I first saw you, you know. Izuku trailed off. There was a momentary silence. Young man, I apologize for not remembering, but how did we meet? Yagi asked. I almost got murdered, Izuku said, a bit too brightly. Both Nedzu and Yagi looked a little thrown by his upbeat tone, but well, he'd gotten to meet All Might. It had been a pretty bad day at the time, sure. And okay, yeah, it was still kind of bad in retrospect, but whatever. Nobody cared, he could be happy about meeting All Might if he wanted. Some guy tried to choke me to death, Izuku added, tacking on the additional detail. You saved me though, and arrested the bad guy. All pretty standard for you. I'm not surprised you don't remember, the whole thing took less than 5 minutes. You even signed my notebook. Well, I'm glad I got there in time, Yagi said, still looking a bit disturbed. And you're fine? Yep, just fine, Izuku said. So that's when I figured it out. And I didn't tell anyone your name or quirk after. I figured it was classified. Thanks for saving my life, by the way. Of course, that's my job, Yagi said. I'm glad you're fine. And I do appreciate that you kept my identity a secret. Most teenagers wouldn't have been able to. Not to interrupt, Nedzu said. But did you notice any change in Yagi's quirk between then and now? Sort of, Izuku said. Back then I saw it as one for all, transferred, now I see it as one for all, remnants. I kind of wanted to ask you about that. I don't usually see tags like remnants accompanying other people's quirks. You're not the first to have one like it, but I'm curious as to what it might mean. Nedzu frowned. He isn't the only one? Well, only one other person. I saw a person who had the tag copy, but besides him, no one else, Izuku said. Nedzu and Yagi shared a glance. Midoriya, who had that tag? Nedzu asked. Just some guy. Kyudai Garaki, Izuku said. Before Izuku could elaborate on that, Yagi broke into sudden, surprised coughing. Just some guy. We haven't seen Kyudai, not since, Yagi began, trailing off. Not since 5 years ago, but we knew he'd gone into hiding, Nedzu said, his gaze sharpening. He glanced at Izuku. Where did you meet him? If you let us know, we can find him. He's my quirk doctor, Izuku said. Nedzu frowned at that, but said nothing. Is he undercover as a regular quirk physician now? Yagi wondered aloud. Well, he said he didn't usually do quirk evaluations nowadays actually, Izuku said. But he said he was doing this one specifically because he thought my quirk was interesting. He thought my quirk was interesting because of the late manifestation, but I don't want to raise suspicion saying that, so I'll just leave that part out. Nedzu's expression froze. He said your quirk was interesting? Yagi asked. He looked vaguely ill. You won't be going to any further appointments with him, Midoriya? Nedzu said, voice tight. Do you have any more information? His quirk is called Life Force, Izuku said, getting nervous with Nedzu's weird behavior. And he's undercover using the fake name Dr. Tsubasa. Besides that, I don't really know. You could ask my mom, though, she met him too. Good. We'll do that then, Nedzu said. You're free to go eat lunch, Midoriya. If you don't mind me asking, Izuku said, glancing up at him. Is this guy some kind of criminal or something? Izuku knew he shouldn't be pushing, but he really had to know. He won't be bothering you, Nedzu said. It wasn't a real answer, nor a denial. Izuku nodded in acceptance despite this, and ducked out of the office. That was so weird. They definitely knew who I was talking about, and I never got an answer on what those tags meant. Izuku thought to himself. Whatever that was, I better check my relationship screen to make sure we're still in the clear. Let's see if I can just summon Nedzu's rep without opening the entire screen. Nedzu, relationship, Izuku said. Nedzu, rep plus protective. Looks like he could do that, but that wasn't what Izuku was focused on right now. His rep had increased, and Nedzu had gotten a new protective tag. In the back of his mind, it made Izuku wonder who Kyudai Garaki really had to be to get that kind of reaction out of Nedzu, and to move his descriptor from concerned to protective. How bad was Kyudai to make Nedzu think he needed protection? As Izuku was pondering this, the intruder alarms started blaring. Level 3 security breach, the announcement said. What? Izuku said. He glanced out the window. Part of the gate seemed to have crumpled, probably the result of someone's quirk. And more noticeably, the press was trying to push their way through the flaw in the gate. So the media broke down the gate, Izuku muttered to himself. He shook his head, sighing. He was pretty sure Nedzu wouldn't be in the mood to deal with this. Nedzu was not happy. Things had started going wrong when Aizawa had revealed to him Midoriya had accidentally discovered Yagi's true identity. Now that didn't ruin his day, not really. Even though it was an additional risk, the whole situation was very exciting. Besides, Midoriya's story about meeting All Might 10 months ago was very believable, and Midoriya seemed very apologetic about the whole thing. If Midoriya hadn't told anyone in the past 10 months about the secret, he was unlikely to in the future. Admittedly, hearing that Midoriya had almost been murdered curbed his good mood a little. He felt a little bad being all cheerful after hearing that a student almost died, some villain had tried to strangle him or something, but on the bright side, Midoriya didn't seem too broken up about it. For some reason, either he was coping remarkably well, or he was trying to play it off so no one would worry about him. Maybe both. And then Midoriya had mentioned he met Kyudai Garaki. Kyudai Garaki, the faithful associate of All for One, and missing in action ever since the battle 5 years ago. Nedzu had expected to find him again eventually, but not like this. And then Midoriya's admission, he's my quirk doctor because he's interested in my quirk. Midoriya didn't seem to understand the implications of that, but Nedzu did. Kyudai's express role under All for One had been quirk experimentation. That and finding interesting quirks for All for One to take. Nedzu wasn't in the habit of worrying for other people, but he felt a wave of mild dread at the knowledge of how close this student had come to death. Kyudai's subjects were certainly not known for surviving. Nearly getting involved in Quirk experimentation, it was likely the intelligence increase that Kyudai was interested in, which was more unique in a human than being able to tell someone's name and quirk on sight. Unless, of course, he'd grown interested in Midoriya when he was young, before the battle, in which case the first part of Midoriya's quirk might have been meant as a gift for All for One. Hopefully it was the second. In that case, Kyudai didn't have any reason to be interested in Midoriya any longer, because All for One was dead. But Nedzu worried that he wouldn't be that lucky. It didn't happen yet, Nedzu thought to himself. I caught it in time. Nedzu would do a thorough review of Midoriya's medical information to make sure that nothing had already been done to Midoriya. If the man had been Midoriya's only quirk doctor, Midoriya would have no idea what counted as a standard medical procedure in the area of quirk medicine. Midoriya would be liable to think whatever Kyudai did to him was normal, if Kyudai could think up a decent excuse for doing it. On that front, an additional medical checkup and a proper quirk evaluation, one by a qualified professional with ethics, would not be out of place. Nedzu was a little furious. Oh, he would find Kyudai Garaki. Considering the man was still operating on people, he needed to be found as quickly as time and resources allowed. It was definitely not a good day today. And then the intruder alarms went off. Izuku was still staring out the window at the broken gate when Nedzu came out from his office and pulled Izuku from the window. Don't just stand there, the alarms are going off, Nedzu said sternly. You're supposed to evacuate. It's just the media, Izuku said, glancing back to the window. Nedzu turned his head to the window, eyes flickering in understanding. The press. I'll handle them. Just stay here then, thank you, Nedzu said, gently pushing Izuku into his office. Yagi, come with me. Izuku sat down in the office chair again, while Nedzu and Yagi left to investigate the cause of the alarms. Hey Izuku, we didn't see you during lunch, Uraraka said. Izuku shrugged. I was about to go to lunch when the alarm started, but I was in a different part of the building, Izuku said. I just ended up eating my lunch somewhere else. Izuku had ended up stuck inside Nedzu's office for essentially the whole lunch PRD. He supposed it made sense. For Nedzu to want him to stay there while the alarms were going off, even with untrained eyes, Izuku was able to quickly notice the steel doors and top-notch security around the office. It seemed like an exceptionally fortified area. Oh, that means you didn't see what happened, Uraraka said. It was really cool. Everyone was panicking because of the alarms and there was a big mob, but Ida jumped on top of the emergency exit sign and yelled that it was just the media and that they should calm down. He got everyone to exit the lunchroom in an orderly fashion, she said. Oh wow. That's really impressive, Ida, Izuku said. Ida gave a proud smile. It was nothing, he said. It was only the proper thing to do. Honestly, I wouldn't have known what to do, Izuku said. Maybe you should be the class rep. I'm too quiet. I don't think I could stand ordering people around. Nonsense, Ida said. He took Izuku by the shoulders. Assertiveness is not an inherent trait of personality, rather, it is a skill that can be learned. Besides, I am sure our classmates will respect you regardless of how loud you are. I know I do. Izuku teared up a little. Really? Ida nodded. You'll do great. Izuku smiled, trying really hard not to cry. Thanks, Ida. Even though it appeared at first glance that the media had broken the gate, Nedzu still strongly suspected that someone else was responsible. Even after resolving the immediate crisis and starting the gate repairs, Nedzu was a little concerned about this apparent new threat. But there wasn't much time for it now. Not immediately now, at least. He had something else to focus on. Because the school day was over, there was a much lower-hanging fruit to handle. Nedzu turned and gave Hound Dog a grin. Today we plan, and tomorrow, we will attack a doctor. You'll be helping. Hound Dog, who had been stacking papers and minding his own business, nearly dropped his paperwork in surprise. Not an innocent doctor, I hope? Nedzu shook his head with a slight grimace. No, far from it. Nothing about Kyudai could be called innocent. And he was going down. Midoriya Izuku LVL, 17 age, 15. HP, 160-160. Exhaustion, 0-800. Title, Broken Chemist, half damage from toxins, acids, poisons. Quirk, the gamer. Stats, skills, inventory, relationships, quest log. Vit, 16, STR, 18, Dex, 20, Int, 43, Wis, 45, Cha, 22. Unallotted stat points, 12. Notable skills. Quirk analysis LVL, 46. Make deductions about what a person can do with their powers and what their weaknesses might be. Observe LVL, 18. Gathers information about something when the player states, observe, while looking at the thing in question. Detect enemies LVL, 16. Say, detect enemies, allowed to detect anyone with the enemy, relationship, or the bloodlust status effect within a 20-foot radius. It had become a bit of a habit for Izuku to experiment with healing items in the mornings. This morning he decided to try a little bit of making his own healing items, rather than just testing the ones he found around his house. To start, he tried mixing coffee and green tea to see what happened, and what he got. Coffee, minus 30x, plus 2 HP. What strange drink have you created? It was interesting at least. And it tasted fickle. Not really. It didn't taste very good. He tried putting sugar in, but then the stat lineup changed. Sweetened coffee, minus 30x less bitter now. That seemed to completely eliminate the health benefit. Coffee seemed like just a mix of the stats of coffee and green tea. And if you added sugar, that completely eliminated the HP increase. Izuku noticed that most of the things that healed were supposed to be healthy or had healing properties in real life, and that most of the things that erased exhaustion had some kind of caffeine, stimulant, or anti-exhaustion real-life property. That's probably why adding sugar ruined the coffee benefits, because sugar wasn't good for you. So, Izuku needed something healthy and concentrated. So, he came up with another idea, one of those green smoothies. He quickly made it from a recipe he found online and the fruits and vegetables he found in his house, to much better results. Green smoothie, minus 10x, plus 15 HP, antioxidants and stuff. That seemed pretty good. A small cup having a 15 HP increase was pretty decent. It would at the very least be a good recovery item even if he couldn't have it during battle. And then, in another slide of brilliance, he mixed that with green tea. Green tea smoothie, minus 30x, plus 25 HP. A fun morning treat. Now this stuff was concentrated enough that Izuku could probably use it for some kind of healing potion. Maybe he could try adding other healthy stuff to his smoothie, like kale or raspberries, maybe some lemon. Logic dictated that if he could increase the healthiness of his green smoothie, that would get him more HP. Izuku was getting somewhere. Izuku poured his green tea smoothie into a thermos and put it in his backpack. He could drink it with lunch. If Izuku got any bruises or cuts, he could get rid of them instantly at lunchtime with his green tea smoothie creation. It was kind of a weird feeling knowing that. His mother got up for breakfast, just in time to see him making his green tea smoothie. She beamed at him, happy he was doing, well, not cooking exactly, but something that he seemed to enjoy, and had time to make him some breakfast quickly before he went to school. He beamed at his mother, and left for school in a good mood. Psst, hey, Tagata whispered, during a brief lull in math class. You said you were Midoriya, right? Are you a second year? I'm a first year, Izuku said honestly, but a little nervously. Sweet, Tagata said, grinning. I'm glad you're in my class. This is a great way to meet my new kuhais. Oh, thanks, Izuku said. No problem, Tagata said. If you ever need any help with anything, feel free to ask me. I know it can be kinda hard to transition to a new school. Oh, thank you, Izuku said, trying to sound friendly. He paused, unsure of what he could add to the conversation. So, how are you liking UA? Tagata asked, after a few seconds of silence. Izuku briefly considered the past few days. He'd had some close calls with the teachers, but nothing bad had happened. He'd even met a few people, like Ida and Uraraka, who seemed to like him. And Bakugo had been weirdly chill the whole time. Sure, he could probably have said the same thing, except the Bakugo being chill part, about the start of middle school, before things had gone south for him, but, considering the first few days objectively on their own merits, "It's been pretty great," Izuku said. "It's kind of amazing here. I actually really like it." "I know, right?" Tagada said, grinning with excitement and puffing out his chest with pride. "I was so wowed by all the technology and stuff during my first year. So impressive." "All right, you two, get back to your worksheets," Ectoplasm said. "Okay." Izuku yelped, a bit surprised, while Tagada sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck and nodded. Speaking of impressive new technology, Izuku knew he'd get to see some this afternoon with his class-scheduled trip to the USJ, a state-of-the-art rescue heroics facility. They'd be riding the bus there. To meet 13, he'd heard. Uraraka was thrilled at the idea. Apparently she really admired the rescue hero. And on the bus, once they'd all boarded, Izuku got to hear Kaken of all people get teased during everyone's conversation about quirks, which was incredibly bizarre to Izuku. Bakugu's got a flashy quirk, but he's only been here a week and we all know his personality is absolute garbage, Kaminari teased. "Take that back, loser. I'll kill you," Bakugu shouted in his direction. "See," Kaminari said, absolutely fearless. "The social hierarchy is way different here," Izuku noted. "Kaken's violent approach isn't working very well. Maybe because our teacher won't let him beat people up? But if Kaken's not top dog, then who is? Maybe Kaminari because he's funny and popular? Or Ida because of his force of will?" It was all very complicated and confusing to Izuku. Sometimes, Izuku felt like his charisma boosts from the gamer only revealed to him that people were even more complicated and troublesome than he'd thought. "Sorry to ask, Karo," Azui said. "But Midoriya, didn't Bakugu say something about your quirk on the first day? What does he have against your quirk?" "I don't think anything in particular, he just doesn't like me," Izuku said, with a nervous smile. "My quirk's just analysis. It lets me know someone's name and quirk by looking at them. And gives me a little bit of a boost when it comes to math and science. That's why I'm in different classes. It's nothing flashy, really." "Oh, so you got moved up classes?" Kirishima said. "But that's super cool even if it's not flashy. You get to be all smart and stuff. You're probably super good at school." "I wish I could be good at school," Ashido sighed. Kaminari gave Ashido a consoling pat on the shoulder. "We all do." "Hey, we're here," Aizawa said, glancing back at everyone. Everyone clambered out of the bus in a less than graceful manner, despite Ida's protests, excited to see the UI. It was a big building, purple and blue in color scheme, with a giant dome for a top. Izuku couldn't help but grin at the sight of it, though he himself had no particular plans to become a rescue hero. But All Might helped in rescues and disaster situations a lot. And while the fake quirk Izuku came up with wouldn't help him in rescue scenarios directly, the secondary intelligence boost part of it would be helpful. He could study up on rescue techniques, and maybe someday he could be the one coordinating the rescue. Izuku smiled a bit. He liked that. The idea of rescuing people from disasters appealed to him, whether on the ground or by organizing the rescue. He'd have to pay special attention to this lesson. When the group entered the USJ, which was even bigger on the inside than it looked, they saw 13 standing right inside the entrance. They gave a little wave to Aizawa. "Where's Ahem Yagi?" Aizawa asked. 13 put up 3 fingers, shrugging. Aizawa scowled. "No surprise for the first years, then. Let's just get started." What does he mean by surprise for the first years? And he sounded like he was about to say All Might too. Was All Might supposed to show up in his original form for this lesson? That would make sense, actually. That's probably why Aizawa switched to saying Yagi. If everyone else here heard that All Might was supposed to be here but bailed, they'd probably be super disappointed that he didn't stay for the surprise. Admittedly, Izuku was a little disappointed too. It was mitigated by the fact that he knew All Might was teaching them every single day in secret during heroics, but it would have been super cool to see him in his proper All Might form up close again. Those 3 fingers, 3 hours? Was 13 trying to tell Aizawa that All Might ran out of time in his buff hero form? Izuku was aware that All Might could only work for 3 hours a day, considering the time limit he'd seen and the fact that All Might never seemed to work beyond that time, but he'd never actually gotten confirmation that it was true. No one had volunteered that information to him when he'd discovered All Might's identity. Maybe he should have asked. "Welcome to the USJ, everyone," 13 said. "Now listen carefully. I'm sure you're aware I have a powerful quirk. It's called Black Hole. I can use it to SCK up everything and turn it into dust. Like me, some of you also have powers that could be dangerous. Please don't forget that if you lose focus or make the wrong move, that your powers can be deadly," 13 said. Well, that was true of most of his classmates. It wasn't really true of Izuku. He didn't have the type of power that could easily kill by accident. Not at this stage, at least. But maybe if he unlocked more powers with the gamer, he could eventually get a quirk that was more dangerous. Carry the lessons of the past few days over to this class. Today, you're going to learn how to use your quirks to save people's lives. After all, that's what being a hero is about. Ensuring the safety of others, 13 said. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening. Izuku grinned at that, while the rest of the class broke into cheers. I'm really excited to learn how to rescue properly. I don't actually have any experience on this topic, meaning I need this training just as much as anyone else here. Right now that's, Aizawa started. The lights flickered. What was that? Kirishima asked. The lights continued to flicker, and the water in the fountain seemed to start glitching. Izuku peered closer at the fountain to get a better look, only to see a purple-black portal forming in the middle of the fountain. Stay together and don't move, Aizawa ordered. The portal opened up and people started walking through, dozens of them. Izuku got the sense that this wasn't another test. 13, protect the students, Aizawa said, unwrapping his capture scarf. Izuku took a step forward to get a better look at the fountain, but Aizawa bit out a sharp, "Stay back. This is real. Those are villains. A villain attack. A real one? This is unbelievable," Izuku thought. Seconds later, his quirk confirmed what Aizawa had said. Alert! Emergency quest activation. Emergency quest. Attack on the USJ. Goal: survive the villain attack. Bonus 1. Survive with 0 deaths among your allies. Bonus 2. Defeat USJ bosses. Count 3. Bonus 3. Level up a skill 7 times during the battle. Rewards: plus 10 stat points, plus 1000 XP. Bonus 1 rewards: Elvil, 1 skill. Bonus 2 rewards: title. Bonus 3 rewards: title. Izuku couldn't help but quickly look through the quest, despite the dangerous situation. Level up a skill 7 times? What, as I'm being murdered? And defeat all the bosses myself? Who the hell does my quirk think I am? I am completely unqualified. The doors of the USJ were thrown open. Hello, students. I am, All Might paused, glancing out over the sea of enemies. Ugh. The students cheered at his entrance, excited to see All Might. He'll beat up the bad guys. Ashido squealed. Aizawa, on the other hand, was all business. What's your time? Aizawa asked, glancing at All Might sharply. 2 minutes, All Might said. Aizawa's face twisted with muted fury, while 13 looked worried. And All Might wasn't smiling anymore. I'm getting the sense this might still be a bad situation, Izuku thought to himself.